네, 인사드리겠습니다. 저는 오늘 1차
Hello.
한미 표준 포럼
Nice to meet you
진행을
all.
맡은 조주연입니다.
Welcome to the first Korea
고맙습니다.
US Standards Forum. I'm Cho Ju-yeon, the MC for this entire ceremony. It's a pleasure to
네,
meet you
오늘
all.
정말 날씨가 많이 추워졌음에도
The weather has
불구하고 많은
gotten
분들께서
very
함께
cold,
해주셨는데요.
but despite the
저희가
cold weather,
언어가 한국어로
we're
진행이
joined by
되기
many
때문에
people
먼저
here,
통역 채널
and
안내를 드리도록
we're going to
하겠습니다.
be
So allow me to
proceed
introduce our
in the Korean
receivers and the
language.
channels of interpretation today. 네, 채널 1번이 한국어, 채널 2번이 영어입니다.
Channel 1
So
for
please
Korean and
use
Channel 2 for
one
English for
Korean
interpretation
and channel
services.
2 for English. 네, 다시 한번 이렇게 많은 분들께서 참석해
Thank you
주셔서
once
대단히
again for joining
감사드립니다.
us.
오늘
today.
진행되는 한미
I'm
표준
so
포럼은
encouraged by such a large
글로벌
turnout.
기술 그리고
So we're
표준의
here
강국이죠.
to
미국과
promote
함께
standards
양자
cooperation with the United States, which is a global technology and standards powerhouse in the areas of quantum technology, autonomous driving, AI, semiconductors, and other advanced technologies to the next level. That is why we have invited national standardization bodies and experts from Korea and the United States to share their standards policies. We'll be having an MOU ceremony, and there will be technical presentations to be followed afterwards. So we would like to ask you to stay with us until the end of the
네,
program.
그리고 오늘 이 포럼은 코로나19 확산
And this
방지를
forum
위해서
is being
정부
held in
방역
strict
수칙을
compliance with the
철저히
government's
준수하면서
COVID-19
진행되고 있다는 점
guidelines.
안내 말씀드리겠습니다. 일단 먼저 많은 전문가분들께서도 온라인을
And to
통해
kick off our
시청해 주실
event, we
텐데
would
다시
like to
한번
also
깊은
thank our online as well as
감사드리면서
offline
귀한 거는
participants,
직접 해주신
despite their very busy
분들께도
schedules, and
감사
especially
인사드리겠습니다.
those of you who have
제
joined us
1차 한미
despite
표준
their very busy
포럼은
schedules.
표준 협력 대화 및
The
표준
first
포럼
Korea-US
출범을
standards
위한
will kick off
MOU
with the signing
계획
ceremony for the
서명
implementation
시작으로
plan for the
제가
MOU
개회식
for
그리고 두
launching
분의
as Dialogue and
기조
Standards
강연,
Forum.
그리고 이어서는 양국
So there will be an
전문가들의
opening
기술
ceremony. There will be
발표까지
two
다양하게
keynote
진행될
presentations to be
예정입니다.
followed by
오전
technical
세션에는
presentations
그렇게
by
진행을
experts from
하고요.
Korea
그리고
and the
이후
United
심야
States. That will be the end of
세션에서는
the
한미
morning
전문가들
session.
간의
And we will
패널
later,
토론도
in the
진행할
evening,
예정입니다.
have panel
많은
discussions
관심
amongst
부탁드리겠습니다.
Korea and US experts. We
올해는
ask for your
이
continued
MOU 이행
interest.
계획 서명식으로 본 행사를
So
시작할
we're going to
텐데
be having an
사실
MOU
국가
signing
기술
ceremony for the
표준원과
implementation plan to
미국의
kick off our
NC,
event.
미국 표준원은
CATS and
2000년
NC
9월부터
have
최초로
been working
MOU를
since
체결하고
September
또
2000
2005년 9월에
by signing the
MOU를
first MOU,
갱신해서
and they also
지속적인 표준
updated
협력을
their
해왔습니다.
MOU in September
그래서
2005
서명식을
to
오늘은
continue their
화상
standards
연결을 통해서
cooperation.
해볼
So we're going to
예정인데요.
be having a
한국의
virtual
국가기술
MOU signing
표준원의
ceremony.
이상훈
Administrator
원장님,
Lee
그리고
Sang-hoon from
미국의
CATS
미국 표준원
and
ANSI의
President and
조
CEO Joe
바티아
Batia of
회장님 함께
NC
진행해 주시겠습니다.
will be
일단
signing
먼저
the
국가기술
documents.
표준원 이상훈
And Administrator
원장님을
Lee
무대 위로
from CATS
모시겠습니다.
is
박수
kindly
부탁드리겠습니다.
asked to please come up to the stage. Please welcome him as he comes up to the stage.
네, 말씀드렸듯이 저희 한미
As I mentioned
양국은
before, our two
2000년부터
countries have been working very
사이에서
closely since
오랜
2000 and through
협력과
the MOU.
체결을
We've had
하고
very
갱신을
long-standing
해왔습니다.
cooperation
양자기술,
through
자율차,
updating our
인공지능,
documents.
반도체 등 첨단
We're
기술
looking to further
분야에서
promote cooperation
실질적인
in
표준
areas
협력
of quantum
성과를
technology,
창출하기
autonomous
위해서
driving, AI,
MOU
and
이행 계획
semiconductors,
체결을
among other
진행하고
advanced
있습니다.
technologies,
본
to further
MOU 이행
strengthen our
계획은
close and practical
한미
cooperation in
표준 협력 대화
creating
및 표준
tangible
포럼의 출범을
outcomes.
알리면서
This also kicks
한국과
off
미국 양국 간
the S
표준화
Dialogue
정책과
and
전략을
S
교류하고
Forum,
표준 협력 과제를
and
발굴하며
with a view to promoting
공동으로 수행해
exchanges in our
나가기 위한
respective
긴밀하고
standardization
꾸준한
policies and
협력
strategies.
관계를 유지하는 것에
We're also
상호
agreeing
합의합니다.
mutually to
네,
maintain
그럼
our
지금부터
close
MOU
and steady
이행 계획
cooperative
서명을
relations.
진행하도록 하겠습니다.
Now we're going to have an
국가기술
MOU
표준원
signing
이상훈
ceremony
원장님,
with implementation
미국
plan.
표준원
Administrator
조
Lee
바티아
and
회장님,
President CEO Joe
서명을 해주시기
Batia,
바랍니다.
could you please sign the documents?
President Joe Batia, please assign your respective area. Thank you very much. 네, 서명이 완료된 것 같습니다. 그럼
I
모두
think the
서명
signing has
완료된
been
문서를
completed. Please
가슴 가까이
raise the signed
들어주시면 저희가
documents
기념
closer to
촬영을
your
하도록
chest
하겠습니다.
for
Yes,
photos.
please hold up the MOU document so that we can take a group photo. 네, 많은 박수
A
부탁드리겠습니다.
round of applause is in order, ladies and gentlemen.
네, 고맙습니다.
Thank you
네,
very
이제
much.
원장님 다시 자리로 모시도록
Administrator,
하겠습니다.
yes, you can go back to your seat now.
네, 정말 중요한 순간을 함께
That was a
해주셨습니다.
very
고맙습니다.
important milestone
한미
in our
양국의
journey.
표준 협력 대화 그리고 표준
S dialogue
포럼
between
출범을
Korea
위한
and the United States and
MOU
also standards
계획이
forum
체결되었음을
have now
다시
become
한번 안내 말씀드리겠습니다.
regular
네, 이
milestones
순간을
in our
기념하기 위해서 다시 한번 큰
standards
박수 부탁드려도
cooperation. So why
될까요?
don't we give a
네,
big round of
감사합니다.
applause to commemorate this very important moment in our partnership.
네, 저희가 본격적인 행사 시작에
So
앞서서
before we begin the forum in
중요한 두
earnest,
분의 인사 말씀을
we'll be having
내놓을
opening
수는
ceremonies,
없겠죠.
or to
국가기술표준원
begin with the
이상훈
opening
원장님의 개회사를
remarks
먼저
by the
전해보도록
administrator
하겠습니다.
of CATS.
원장님을 다시
Sang
무대로
Hoon Lee, please
모시겠습니다.
come up to
박수
the stage to
부탁드립니다.
deliver your opening speech.
It is very honorable for me to make a speech today. Good morning and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Sang-Hoon Lee, administrator of the Korean Agency for Technology and Standard under Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy. First of all, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to President and CEO of the American National Standard Institute, and Mr. Kim, James Kim, Chairman and CEO of the American Chamber of Commerce in Korea. Thank you. And Mr. Andrew Harrell, Minister Counselor of the U.S. Embassy and the Consulate in the Republic of Korea for gracing the event with your presence. Thank you very much. I'd also like to extend my deepest gratitude to Mr. Kang Myung-soo Kang, Chairman of the Korean Standard Association, for his support to hold this such a wonderful event. Thank you very much. Furthermore, I'd like to express my sincere appreciation to Ms. Saunders, Mary Saunders, Vice President of the American National Standard Institute, and Professor Hung-yeol Yeom at Soonchunhyang University for delivering the keynote speech for today's forum. Last but not least, I'd like to send my special thanks to the experts from both Korea and the United States for making technical presentations and participating in the panel discussions today. At the competition for the global technology is accelerating around the world. Each nation makes all effort to achieve growth through technical innovation and advanced technology in the cutting-edge industries. Standards play a significant role in a leading technical development in high-tech sectors, becoming the foundation of industries. Moreover, standards are an important tool to secure the stability and reliability of the supply chain. As an important friend and partner to Korea, the United States has been collaborating in various fields. The standardization cooperation is also one of the diverse channels of cooperation between Korea and the United States. It is expected that the collaboration will lead the growth and development of industries of the both countries. Today, the Standard Dialogue and the Standard Forum have been launched to strengthen cooperation in high-tech fields such as quantum technology, autonomous driving, and artificial intelligence, and semiconductor. There is a saying that two hands are better than one. Through launching this Standard Dialogue and Forum, we become two hands in the world of standardization. And I expect our two hands can make our work much better in the future with a friendly cooperation between our two countries. We will strengthen the mutual cooperation system for standardization and expand it to the wide range of areas in responding to climate change. Once again, I really appreciate all participants for taking time out of your busy schedule and all guests for joining this event from the United States. I hope all of you will stay safe and healthy in this challenging time caused by COVID-19. Thank you very much. 감사합니다.
네, 이상훈 원장님 좋은 말씀 감사드립니다.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lee,
앞으로도
for
이렇게 여러 가지
the opening
분야에서
remarks.
기술 협력
As we
그리고
move
표준
forward in a
포럼에
number
대한
of
협력을
different
더욱더
fields, I
강화하면서
believe that
많은
we need
기대를
to
해볼 수 있을
strengthen
것 같습니다.
our
네,
cooperation
그럼
in
다음은 미국
standardization.
표준원 조
I
바티아
appreciate your
회장님께서
comments,
또
Mr.
개사를
Lee.
해주시겠습니다.
And moving on to the
그러면 저희
next
화상으로
opening
한번
remarks
만나볼
to be
텐데요.
delivered by
President Joe Bhatia,
President,
can you hear us?
President and CEO Joe Bhatia of NC. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please deliver your opening remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. It's my great pleasure to join CATS Administrator, Mr. Lee, James Kim, the Chairman and CEO of American Chamber of Commerce in Korea, and Andrew Harrop, the Minister Counselor at the U.S. Embassy Consulate and in Republic of Korea. So it's indeed my pleasure to welcome you to the first Korea-U.S. Standards Forum. I was here last year. We had a meeting, bilateral dialogue, but we did not have a forum. So this is the new launch, and we hope to progress and go ahead and do more cooperative work in the future years. Given the great importance of the U.S.-Korea trade relationship, this forum really offers an excellent opportunity for our countries to exchange information on key standardization issues, identify potential opportunities for cooperation, and advance activities that support U.S.-Korean trade. I was pleased to provide a welcoming remark last year's forum and enjoy the expert presentations which were shared in the greatest spirit of cooperation that I can remember. This year, I'm glad to see that ANSI and CATS have had more in-depth collaboration and have co-hosted this event with the support of not just our own staff, but also our members and partners from both sides. I wish that we could have met in person. That would have been much more charming and we would have enjoyed that more. But nonetheless, we're fortunate to have the technologies that standards and others underpin that capability and enable us to cross the oceans, even if just virtually, so that we can connect meaningfully in these unique and difficult times. So as the coordinator of the U.S. private sector standardization system, and as the U.S. national standards body to ISO and IEC, ANSI is committed to advancing standards-based solutions that facilitate, in my view, three very major things. Number one, it helps drive emerging industries. Number two, we work together to protect public health, safety, and the environment. And number three, support the international trade. That also benefits our two nations. The recently updated United States Standards Strategy, which the ANSI VP of Government Relations, Mary Saunders, will present in just a few minutes, affirms the U.S. commitment to standardization that meets global needs and supports a global trading system. According to the U.S. Department of Commerce, International Trade Administration, 93% of all the global goods exported rely on conformance to standards that we work hard to produce. These statistics illustrate the enormous impact that standardization has on market access and global trade. It also underscores why this forum discussion is so beneficial to all those that participate in the process. Indeed, South Korea is among the U.S. most important trade partners. The U.S. goods and services trade with South Korea totaled an estimated $155 billion in 2020. And according to the latest data from the Department of Commerce, U.S. exports of goods and services to South Korea actually supported an estimated 256,000 additional jobs in 2019. We don't have the numbers for 2020. I'm sure there'll be a little bit of a dip because of COVID, but I'm sure they will bounce back and jump to the bigger numbers in the future. These are among the reasons why ANSI and the U.S. standardization community are so deeply committed to working closely with our Korean counterparts to support the shared standardization priorities and trade. With the growth of transformative technologies such as AI, quantum computing, autonomous driving, and electrical vehicles, the global standardization community faces now new challenges, but also new opportunities. And as the essential component in the modern electrical devices, the semiconductors are tremendously important in terms of their economic and technological reach, all these sectors of verticals. Standards and conformance solutions must respond and evolve faster than ever to meet the needs of highly dynamic system that crosses borders and drives growth. As the technology deployment becomes more global, new competitors and shifts in balance of interest also come into play and create new challenges and also new opportunities. All of this underscores the value of the strong and positive US-Korean relationship in standardization. Our dialogue can help better position our nations to meet the demands of changing technologies, changing priorities, and the changing policies and leadership around the globe. You know, administrations change, policies change with them, and that does have an impact on what we do together or individually in our nations. Today, we're joined by the US and Korean experts in the quantum technology, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and the future of mobility. Tomorrow for US, but later this evening in Korea, we will dive even deeper into these sectors with technical sessions run by experts in these fields. Those topics represent shared priorities for the US and Korea. We identify those. They are the areas where standardization can facilitate major progress for people, businesses, and industries all around the globe. I look forward to those presentations from the former esteemed speakers and encourage everyone to consider where they can identify opportunities for cooperation, continued dialogue, and future activities that may exist as opportunities for us to work together on. After all, we are really a global trading village. Working together through standardization, we can develop solutions that benefit the world. Thank you very much for your attention. I wish you a good evening, good morning in your case. Look forward to discussing further dialogue.
Well, President Joe Bhatia, thank you, and thank you also for joining in despite the late hours. 네, 다시 한번 좋은 말씀해주신 조 바티아 회장님
Thank you very
감사드립니다.
much,
네,
CEO
그럼 이어서 바로
President Joe
축사를
Bhatia.
한번 청해 보도록
Now we will
하겠습니다.
hear
먼저는 주한
congratulatory
미국
remarks
상무회의소 제임스
by
킴 회장님께서
James
축하
Kim,
말씀을 전달해
AmCham Korea Chair and
주시겠습니다. 무대 위로
CEO.
모시겠습니다.
I'd
큰
like
박수
to invite
부탁드립니다.
Mr. James Kim to the stage for the congratulatory remarks.
Good morning to our audience here in Korea, and obviously a good evening for those joining from the United States. I'd like to thank CATS, ANSI, and KSA for this very special invitation for me to speak today. I especially want to thank Mr. Sang-Hoon Lee, CATS Administrator, Joe Bhatia, ANSI President and CEO, and my good friend Andrew Harrop, the Minister Counselor for the Economic Affairs at the U.S. Embassy in Seoul. Andrew is new here in Korea, but he's already done a phenomenal job representing America here in Korea. AmCham represents over 800 member companies and affiliates from all kinds of industries. And AmCham deeply appreciates the vital role that standard-setting organizations such as CATS, ANSI, and KSA play in driving what we call sustainable economic growth in the context of the broader U.S.-Korea relations. Standards, from my perspective and AmCham's perspective, is the building block for the global economy, affecting over 80% of the international commerce that takes place today. Standards are essential for creating a fair, predictable, and prosperous economy where everyone could succeed fairly. This is especially true in today's highly interconnected and technology-focused world where I don't think any country can afford to go alone. That's why I think today's forum is so important. History shows that when countries deviate from global standards in an attempt to protect their own domestic industries, they end up losing out on innovative investments, products, and ideas that are much needed for sustainable economic growth. These days, we all know that Korea is emerging as a standard-setting powerhouse thanks to its competitive advantage in so many different industries today. Setting standards for emerging and strategic industries such as cybersecurity, AI, which is all very, very critical for global economic prosperity. And it's going to be an important barometer for stronger U.S.-Korea relations in the many years ahead. In this regard, AmCham looks forward to supporting the shared aspiration between U.S. and Korea in formulating and implementing global standards going together forward. So in that light, I want to congratulate again for the chairman in hosting this event today. We need more of these events regardless of the pandemic, and I think together we can be much stronger. So thank you very much for inviting me again, and I look forward to being part of this wonderful forum today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman Kim, for your kind words. 네, 제임스 킴 회장님께서도 정말 좋은 말씀
So
해주셨습니다.
thank you very
그리고
much,
이제까지
Chairman
많은
James Kim.
지원과 또 서포트를
He's
해주신
given
점에
us a
대해
lot of support and assistance
감사드리겠습니다.
for our endeavors. So
그럼
thank you very
마지막으로
much.
주한 미국 대사관
Last
앤드루
but not
헤럿
least, let me
공사
invite
탐사관님께서 축하
Mr.
말씀을
Harrop,
전해주시겠습니다.
who
큰
is
박수와
the
함께
Minister
무대로
Counselor
모시겠습니다.
from the U.S. Embassy in Korea. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Annyeonghaseyo. Good morning and good evening. I'm delighted and honored to join you today, not only for the Korea-U.S. Standards Forum, but especially for this, the inaugural Standards Dialogue. I want to thank the Korean Agency for Technology and Standards, CATS, and the American National Standards Institute for inviting me to speak and for hosting today's event. Lee Hwan-jung-nim, thank you very much. President Bhatia, thank you very much, and congratulations to both of you on signing the MOU. Also, thank you to all of the other speakers this morning, especially James Kim, the chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce, with whom the U.S. Embassy works very closely to promote bilateral joint economic interests here in Korea. As you well know, standards provide the fundamental building blocks for technology, development, and protection. During their summit earlier this year, Presidents Biden and President Moon affirmed the expansion of our bilateral relationship beyond a military alliance to a truly comprehensive partnership. President Biden and President Moon together set forth an ambitious agenda to encourage our scientific cooperation in emerging technologies. Mutually accepted standards are necessary for that cooperation. Pursuant to the vision that they set forth, and through our scientific cooperation, together, we can encourage innovation in next-generation communications networks, including Open RAN, 5G, and 6G. Together, we can lead the way in developing high-capacity batteries and semiconductors that will power the transition to electric vehicles and reduce carbon emissions. Together, we can make a reality our visions for AI and quantum technologies. Together, we can harness the economic opportunities of the fourth industrial revolution. To do this, we must, together, develop effective, transparent, and evidence-based standards that facilitate the safe and secure development and diffusion of cutting-edge technologies. Standards provide a common language for product development around the world and make it possible for us to enjoy current conveniences as we create new opportunities. We are optimistic about the future of technical cooperation and the growing economic ties between the United States and the Republic of Korea. Your work on standards will ensure the success of that cooperation and our joint prosperity. I look forward to today's discussions. 감사합니다.
Thank you once again, Mr. Andrew Harrop, the Minister Counselor Thank you very much for your kind words. 네, 다시 한번 좋은 말씀 감사드립니다. 이런
So thank you very
말씀하셨죠.
much.
효과적이고
He said
투명하고 또
effective,
증거 기반을
transparent,
한
and
표준이
evidence-based
필요하다.
standards
그러면 양국이
are critically
함께한다면 우리는
needed.
더
So
나아갈
if
수
we're
있다는 말씀을
together, we
해주셨는데요.
can
너무나도
make
좋은 말씀
progress further. So
감사드립니다.
thank you very much for your
네,
kind
그럼 이제
words.
한국과 미국의 기술 표준
So,
협력 강화를 위한
in order to
이 포럼이
strengthen our
진행되는데 첫
technology
번째
cooperation
기조
between our two
강연을 청해
countries, we're
보도록
going to begin
하겠습니다.
our keynote
첫 번째
presentations.
기조
The
강연은
first presentation
미국에서
will be
해주실
delivered by
예정이라서
the
저희가
U.S.
화상 연결을 할
speaker, so we'll have to
텐데요.
connect to our
미국
speaker
표준화
online
전략, 혁신과
on
경쟁을
the
위한
U.S. standard
행동
strategy, the framework for
프레임워크라는
action
주제로
to
미국
support innovation and
NC의
competitiveness.
VP이시죠.
Vice President Dr. Mary Saunders from ANSI
So Ms.
will make
Saunders,
the
if you can
presentation.
hear me well, please let us know. Ms. Mary Saunders, if you can hear us, please let us know, and please check if your microphone is unmuted as well.
Can you
네,
hear
지금
us?
연결
Can you
상태를
hear
잠시만
us?
확인하고 진행하도록 하겠습니다.
If you can hear us, please let us know.
Okay, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well. Can you also turn on your camera for us?
Yes, I'm trying to do that. Hold on.
Thank you. Take your time.
All right, hold on. It was on previously.
Yes. Now we
okay.
see you. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm going to share I'm trying to share the screen. Hold on just a second with the USS presentation. Do you see that?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Okay, perfect. All right, complicated. Thank you very much for inviting me to make this presentation, and good evening to my US colleagues and a very good morning to my Korean colleagues. I remember fondly my several opportunities to travel to Seoul, and I wish I could be there with you currently. So I'm going to give you a high-level overview of the US standard strategy. The first national standard strategy was approved in August of 2000 in the US and revised in 2005 and 2010. Strategic and tactical initiatives contained within this framework were developed so that they could then be used by diverse interests to meet their own national and individual organizational objectives. In 2015, the first national standard strategy was renamed the United States Standard Strategy. And that name change recognizes globalization and the need for standards designed to meet stakeholder needs irrespective of national borders. The name also reflects the standardization environment that incorporates new types of standards development activities and new deliverables, more flexible approaches, and new structures. The US standard system is based on a public-private partnership, and it embraces the participation of all effective stakeholders. The strategy reflects this and reinforces the framework for outcomes that are dynamic, flexible, and responsive to market needs. Our strategy recognizes the growing importance of cross-sector collaboration to address new technology challenges. A little bit more about that later. The 5-year revision cycle ensures that the strategy remains relevant in a challenging global environment. And I want to emphasize that maintaining the integrity and impartiality of the international standards development process is a top priority. Our standards landscape globally and in the US reflects our competition in technologies. And I'll mention a few of these technology focus areas, some of which are the topics of discussion during this forum: advanced communications, artificial intelligence, quantum information science, cybersecurity, and automated and connected infrastructure. The US standard strategy recognizes the need to enhance the overall participation and influence of the United States in international technology standards development. Due to the potential impact of critical and emerging technologies on US national and economic security, they are the most important focus areas for the US government and for our like-minded partners and allies. Standards activities in emerging technologies present a singular opportunity to shape the future of these technologies, their application, and the global market. Cybersecurity and privacy enable all of these emerging technologies and applications and their acceptance in the market and in society. The 2020 edition of the strategy explicitly recognizes that we live in a rapidly changing and global environment. Economic, security, and public health challenges continue to raise the stakes in standards development. And standards development activities have gone almost completely virtual in the past year. As we know, lessons learned will inform future use of virtual processes and collaborative tools. The strategy recognizes the importance of sustainability considerations in standards development, in addition to health, safety, and environmental considerations. It also recognizes the challenges associated with ensuring greater participation by consumers and other stakeholders. For our part, ANSI has committed to enhance education and outreach activities to consumers as well as to other stakeholder groups. Our efforts include an informational brochure on best practices for engaging consumers and other supporting activities. ANSI is publicizing the updated strategy widely among its diverse membership. Individual stakeholder groups will determine how they implement the portions of the strategy that are relevant to them. The updated strategy is informing ANSI's own strategic objectives for this year and the coming year. And ANSI will report on implementation of the strategy on a periodic basis. I want to conclude with emphasizing the strategic vision, which I think is a global vision. The U.S. Standards Strategy promotes the core World Trade Organization principles that underpin the development of market-relevant international standards. Implementation of the standards strategy for the U.S. will reinforce the importance of these principles to the international community through our participation in international standards activities. And outreach activities in collaboration with other national standards bodies and other nations, such as through this forum, are key to implementation of the strategy. I want to thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the remainder of the forum.
Thank you for a very concise but also very detailed keynote speech, Ms. Saunders. Thank you very much and for joining in despite the late hours. 네, 함께 해주신 썬더스 부회장님 다시 한번 감사드리겠습니다.
Thank you very much,
네,
Vice
그럼
President
이어서
Mary
바로 다음
Saunders.
기조 강연 들어보도록 하겠습니다. 이어서는 순천향대학교
Let us move on to the next
염흥열
keynote presentation to be made by Professor Yam Hung-yeol from Suncheon University. He will speak about Korea's national strategy for developing cybersecurity standards for autonomous driving. Please welcome him. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Yam Hung-yeol. I teach at Suncheon University in Korea. Currently, I am serving as the chair of ITUT SG17, which is about security. And recently launched by Korea is a working group on V2X security certification, and I also serve as the chair at that working group as well. First of all, I am very pleased and honored to give you a keynote presentation at the first U.S.-Korea Standards Forum. My presentation will consist of three main parts. First, I will give you an overview of V2X security. Next, I will talk about the endeavors for developing Korea's V2X security standards, and I will wrap up with concluding remarks. Let me first begin with an overview. Recently, at my study group, we have developed these standards that you see on the slide. Inside the V2X environment, cyber threats are being defined, as you can see here, between vehicles, V2V, or V2 infrastructure or V2D, V2 device communication amongst these are being defined. And at the same time, there could be both internal or external communications. V2V, V2 everything are the two different types of external communications. In-vehicle communication is defined as IVN. And onboard units are installed inside the vehicles, and RSUs are also installed on the roads. Now, let me talk about potential attack scenarios in this environment. First, an attacker could sniff V2V messages of nearby vehicles, and from there, the information regarding the vehicles could be leaked. This has to do with privacy protection of drivers. And the second type is to transmit an excessive amount of traffic and block the receiving of messages on the part of the drivers, which is called the DOS attack, denial of service attacks. And at the same time, another type of attack could be in-civil attacks, which is based on identity impersonation. Another type of attack potentially could be in false data injection. And we need a mechanism to be able to effectively counter these attacks. And we thought about how we can prevent these attacks. I believe that we need 5 elements. First, authorization feature is necessary. Vehicles should be authorized to participate in V2V communication. Second is source authentication. Vehicles should be able to authenticate and verify that the sender of the received broadcast messages has a valid identity. The third way is message integrity. The integrity of the received broadcast messages should be checked to ensure that the content has not been modified by any party while in transit. The fourth method is replay protection. And this issue has to do with the concept of accountability and freshness of V2V broadcast messages should be ensured so that receiving vehicles accepts only freshly generated messages under replay protection. And the fifth method is non-repudiation. Then, what are the solutions that we can provide to do this? In the case of the public key infrastructure, this is something that we are using broadly. To support communication amongst the vehicles, they need to have authentication certificates to ensure safety and security of communication. In order to ensure the integrity of the message, you need to add signatures. And secondly, location privacy is extremely important. And accordingly, if you use a certificate for an extended period of time, then that undermines security, and some attackers could identify your location. Therefore, we need to consider ways to ensure the validity of those certificates. And there could be 2 different ways of going about that, which is based on RLA and PCA. So this is an overall SEMC architecture that you see, and there is the highest level of entity at the top, which is called the root CA hierarchy. And once a vehicle is registered, then a registration certificate will be issued. And that is something that's done by enrollment authority. And vehicles also need to obtain short-lived certificates or the proof of identities by the authorization authority to be able to satisfy various security requirements that I mentioned earlier. This is the SEMC architecture in IEEE 1609.2.1. Of course, this is something that can be applied to the V2X environment based on industrial standards. As you can see here, there is an enrollment authority, as you can see here, that issues proof of identity. And once that is done, you have to go to the next level of authorization authority, which is the authorization CA. So there are different levels of authorizations, as you can see here, starting from root certificate authority, intermediate registration and enrollment, and authorization. And at the end, there is misbehavior authority as well. In order to build V2X SEMS, what are the key technologies that we need? As I mentioned, this is based on PKI. And what is necessary is, broadly speaking, two technologies. One is butterfly key expansion. Butterfly key expansion is a novel construction that allows a device to request an arbitrary number of certificates, each with different signing keys and each encrypted with a different encryption key. And there are other concepts, such as implicit and explicit certificates. For instance, from a subject's public key is reconstructed from the data in an implicit certificate and is then implicitly verified. And there are other methods such as digital signature or hash algorithms. So based on this SEMS architecture, safe and secure security services can be supported. There are a number of standardization groups working on the security of V2X. As I mentioned previously, there is ITU-T X1372 standard and TC214 and TC204 have also developed standards. And at the same time, IEEE 1609.2.1 is also under development. And various other standardization endeavors are underway. Now, let me try to share with you what we have been working on in Korea to develop standards for V2X security. Working group on V2X security certification was established in July 2021 under the auspices of the Automated Vehicle Standardization Forum in Korea. And members of this working group come from more than 19 members representing government ministries, academia, public institutions, private companies, and industrial associations. Cybersecurity is an important concept for Korean government institutions as well. So they are taking part. And in this process, CATS are also playing important roles. Now, let me talk about the strategy for developing SEMS standards in Korea. First, we decided to develop SEMS standards first and move on to the more detailed features later on. And second, IEEE 2.1 is already standardized, and we're going to base our developments on this standard 2.1. But there are many peculiar regulatory requirements in Korea and other factors that we need to take into account, and that is why we believe that we are trying to adjust IEEE 1609 2.1 to fit the domestic circumstances in Korea. There are some pending issues that need to be resolved, and we're going to work on finding solutions to those pending issues so that we can find a solution that's befitting for Korea. And we will make a use of all existing standards developed by ITUT, SG17, ETSI, IEEE, ISO, TCs. Another principle that we're trying to abide by is that the gaps of existing standards will be identified, and then they will be submitted to respective SDOs for making improvements and additions. And at the same time, we will consider testing and performance results, which will be carried out by other ongoing V2X pilot projects that are sponsored by the Korean government. And last but not least, we will leverage our past 20 years of experiences for licensed certification services provided by the PKI Certificate Authority according to the Digital Signature Act that started in its enforcement in 1999. Root authorities' role is extremely important, and we are also trying to figure out whether we will need electors for that. And I'm going over the technical issues that we are trying to resolve. And the first is whether we're going to need to use butterfly key expansion. Second, necessity of electors, as I mentioned earlier. Third, use of explicit certificates versus implicit certificates. And next is cryptographic algorithm profiles. How we're going to approach that. And also, we need to make some decisions regarding the use of digital signature algorithms and symmetric algorithms. And we need to determine a period for issuing certificates and determine the number of certificates downloaded once, certificate revocation policies, and the use of hardware security models. This is a roadmap that I've mentioned earlier. As I mentioned previously, this working group on V2X security was established in July 2021. And by the end of March next year, I am expecting to see the first draft text from this working group. And by June next year, the second draft text is expected from this V2X SEMS working group in Korea, so that we can ask the Automated Vehicle Standardization Forum to review it and build a consensus. And review process will begin by the Industrial Standards Council, established under the Industrial Standardization Act from November 2022. And an SEMS standard as industrial standard will be approved by the CATS, hopefully by early 2023. There are some legal requirements relating to this. First is the Digital Signature Act, which has been recently updated. And on your right is an act that promotes the use of autonomous vehicles, which has been updated again pretty recently. And these laws provide legal foundations for establishing certification authorities and so
so forth. All of the legal requirements in detail could be found in these two laws, and these are the laws that we are taking into account in trying to develop SEMS standards. Now, let me try to wrap up my presentation. As I mentioned earlier, there are some technical gaps that we need to fill. So we're going to focus on that, identifying the gaps and make decisions regarding the number of certificates to be issued and how many downloads will be allowed. Those are the types of issues that we're going to go over, and revocation policies will have to be determined. And whether we're going to use the TLM is another decision that we need to make. And recently, we are dealing with the concept of decentralized identity framework. And regarding the shifting to the blockchain-based decentralized identity framework is another gap that we identified, and I believe that we plan to make a contribution to filling this technical gap by working with an upper-level body. Cooperation between the U.S. and Korea, in my opinion, is extremely important. Interoperability of SCMS across countries is very important, and the experiences of operating SCMS should be shared between our two countries. And this collaboration platform for sharing information and exchange experiences should be continued on a regular basis, in my opinion. And at the same time, when necessary, mutual recognition of SCMS is something that we can consider between the U.S. and Korea over a long-term horizon. And collaboration by the two countries in the SDO's standardization work is something that we can also work on together. Once again, I would like to thank you for your attention, and this wraps up my presentation. Thank you.
네, 교수님 좋은 발표 다시 한번 감사드립니다. 사실 V2X 부분 같은 경우에도 태동기라고 볼 수 있는 기술인데 앞으로도 점점 더 많은 협력을 통해서 한미 양국간 더 선도 국가들이 될 수 있었으면 좋겠습니다. 네, 저희가 이제 개회식에 이어서 두 분의 기조 강연을 들어봤는데요. 저희가 잠시 쉬었다가 또 이어서 기술 발표들 들어보도록 하겠습니다. 저희가 10시 15분에 다시 인사드리도록 하겠습니다. 잠시 뒤에 뵙겠습니다. 고맙습니다.
We'll take a short break. We'll see you soon. Thank you.
네, 즐거운 쉬는 시간 되셨을까요?
Did
이제
you all
다음
enjoy your
진행을
break?
하도록
Now let
하겠습니다.
us move
사실
on to the
한미
next
표준 포럼에
session.
대해서는
When it
한국과
comes to
미국의
the
국가
Korea
표준
US Standards
정책이라든지
Forum,
또는 양국
this is a
산업계의 표준
forum
전략을
designed to
공유하고
share
한미
standardization
양국의
strategies
표준화 상호
between the
협력
two
방안을
countries,
모색하는
as well
자리로
as those
구성이 되었는데요.
of
오늘
the
굉장히
two countries'
다양한
industries.
전문가분들의
And
강연을
today we
통해서
have
또 깊이
gathered
있는 내용도
a
알아볼
number
예정입니다.
of experts on different
앞서서
technology
말씀드렸지만 양자
topics.
기술,
And as was
인공지능,
mentioned previously,
자율차, 반도체
quantum
등등의
technology,
분야를
AI,
다뤄보고
autonomous
있는데
driving,
심도
and
깊은 기술과
semiconductors.
표준
We will be the
방안에 대해서
topics
조금 더
that we will
알아보도록
delve
하겠습니다.
into during the
이제
next
마지막
session.
순서만을 남겨두고
We will talk
있는데요.
about the
첫
technology
번째
in depth and
순서로
seek
미국
ways
Quantum
to
Economic Development
cooperate on
Consortium의
standardization.
Executive Director
The
Celia
presentation
Merzbacher님을
will be
모시고
made by
제가
Mr.
기술
Celia
발표 들어보도록 하겠습니다.
Merzbacher on the
양자기술
topic of
표준화
the quantum
전략과
technology
한미 협력을
standards
주제로
strategy and
발표 준비해
Korea-US
주셨는데요. 일단
cooperation.
화상으로 진행을 하기 때문에 연결이 잘 되어 계시는지
We
한번
will
확인하도록
invite her
하겠습니다.
online.
Ms.
Let me
Celia
check the
Merzbacher,
connection.
are you online and can you hear us?
Hello, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. So please go on with your presentation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And thank you very much to the organizers from CATS and ANSI for the opportunity to join you tonight or in the morning or afternoon, wherever you are. I'm Celia Merzbacher. I'm the Executive Director of the U.S. Quantum Economic Development Consortium. And I'd like to take a few minutes in my presentation today to give a very high-level sort of introduction and overview about quantum technology for those of you who aren't in this field, and talk a little bit about the readiness for standardization in different areas of quantum information science and technology and the applications of those scientific advances. And finally, I'll wrap up with a little bit about QEDC, which has some activities in the area of standards, benchmarks, and metrics. So my one slide about quantum really speaks to why we're so excited today about quantum physics, quantum science, and quantum technology and the use of those. What makes quantum different from the sort of usual areas of science and technology are the fundamental properties that are observed at very small length scales. And those include quantized states, and we're used to thinking about that when we think of lasers and MRI systems that take advantage of the quantized states of energy in certain systems. And the idea of uncertainty, the statistical nature of quantum science. These are sort of features of quantum that occur in ensembles of matter. But when you get down to individual atoms and even subatomic length scales, you have these unusual behaviors of superposition and entanglement. And our ability to understand and control those behaviors of matter at those very small length scales are the basis of some of the technologies that are being developed today. So I think everyone's sort of familiar with the idea of digital technologies that we're able to describe things using ones and zeros, and that this is the bit of information in the classical systems. In quantum systems, you have qubits or quantum bits, and there the state of matter allows you to have something that's in both the state of a 1 and a 0. And there's this representation that's commonly used called the Bloch sphere. But that allows for more information to be stored. And it's really the control of matter in this quantum state that allows for quantum computation approaches to be undertaken. Just a reminder, this is not actually a new field of study. In fact, quantum physicists have been working in the theory and experiment of quantum states of matter for a long time. And here are some of the fathers of the field shown here. So for more than 100 years, the field of quantum physics and quantum mechanics has been a field of study, but it's been primarily in the research realm. And what's happening today is that the research is finding its way into practical applications, and there's interest, therefore, in standards. So this slide just shows the diversity of applications. And I think when we think of quantum, we often think about quantum computing applications. And those are certainly very exciting and very important and potentially very disruptive. But there are other applications in fields like metrology and sensing, networks, communications, security, as well as quantum computing. And I'll speak a little bit about several of these application areas in terms of standards that may be important in their development and commercialization. So this picture shows the Google Sycamore quantum computer-based system. The processor they called Sycamore is down at the bottom of this apparatus. And you can see all of the surrounding components and technology that go into a quantum computer. This happens to be based on superconducting qubits. There are several approaches that are being developed, and they all have different requirements and supporting technologies, enabling technologies, but they often require very special and controlled environments. And in the case of superconducting qubits, it requires ultra low temperatures, and this yellow structure at the top is the outside of the dilution refrigerator that the whole thing sits in when it's operating. So you can see there are a number of enabling technologies here. We have obviously a lot of electronics and cabling, and this system, this picture was taken when the computer was about half assembled. And so twice as many of these cables were required ultimately to fully assemble the system. So there are requirements for bringing signals from room temperature, from these electronic control systems into a very cold environment where you have a lot of additional hardware and components, bringing the signals down to the bottom where the processor is. So you can imagine that there would need to be a very well-defined set of standards for the components that go into a system like this. The requirements are not typical. So first, you really need just agreed upon vocabulary to describe how you're going to describe the performance of the components that go into a system like this. And then you need to have agreed upon specifications, validation, testing, ways of measuring reproducibly, and ultimately interoperability is also important. Now, this is just a picture taken from a publication that shows a schematic for a quantum network. And in fact, quantum networks are probably even farther from realization than quantum computers. They require some types of technology that really aren't fully developed and researched yet. Things like quantum memory and the ability to transmit signals and quantized states of matter. And you need, at each of these nodes between the endpoints, you need to be able to do certain characterization measurements. The red lines represent optical fiber that goes between the nodes. There's a limit to how far a signal can go before it degrades. And so you need these repeaters between nodes and so on. So there's an enormous amount of technology that needs to be developed and ultimately standardized, just as in the telecommunications industry today. And finally, this is a picture taken from a typical, I say, physics laboratory, optical physics lab. So here we have an optical bench with an enormous number of optical components laid out to achieve the desired wavelengths and character of light. Many quantum systems depend on interaction between very specific forms of light and matter. And so researchers often work in laboratories that look like this, but this is not a very practical system to use commercially. And so there's a big push in the research realm to come up with ways to reduce the size, the footprint, the weight, the power requirements, and so on. And in fact, a program that was run by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA in the US, called CSAC, Chip Scale Atomic Clock, took essentially the technology that's represented in this picture and develop something that fit into the palm of your hand. It doesn't have perhaps as high performance as the ultimate laboratory version, but this atomic clock in a chip scale package was sufficient to enable all kinds of applications on satellites and in fieldable units and so on. In fact, the #1 customer for this technology, which was completely unimagined when the project was underway, is in oil and gas exploration used to navigate and steer and track systems in undersea drilling apparatus. So these are very enabling technologies, and there's bound to be these kinds of advantages or advances, and of course they will require standards. So here's just a list of some of the enabling technology component systems. Many of them are really not, I guess all of them are not quantum, really. They are classical or conventional enabling technologies that are important, essential components of quantum systems. So cryogenics for maintaining ultra low temperature, RF and microwave electronics that can operate at those low temperatures and that can meet the specifications, lasers of very particular wavelengths, bandwidths, characters. We did a study that showed that there have been research programs or research reports using over 100 different laser wavelengths proposed for various quantum systems. Now, not all of these will be commercialized. So over time, as winners emerge and certain types of lasers, for instance, are incorporated into commercial use and the markets grow, then again, that will be the time when standards will need to be finalized perhaps. And even before then, they will need to be contemplated. Many systems require single photon sources and detectors. And these, again, are not really commercially available. You can get them, but it's a very niche market and they're not standardized. Being able to create things like this chip scale atomic clock requires photonic integrated circuits. Vacuum systems are often important. You can see in this laboratory up at the top, a vacuum system, for example. And standardized packaging and input-output technologies are going to be critical to scaling up and meeting the potential of the commercial applications. So where are we now? As is often the case in a new area of technology, and by the way, it's nice to see some familiar faces. I was involved with ANSI when they launched their nanotechnology standards program. And a lot of what I'm seeing in the quantum space reminds me of those early days of nanotechnology. There are a number of groups that are developing dictionaries, glossaries, terminology standards. And one of those is supported by ANSI, and I'm sure there are people who are involved with that here today. There's a need for agreed upon metrics for measuring progress. Quantum computers today are relatively low performance, and we want to measure their progress. And so coming up with ways to do that is of high interest, but it's also an important or something that needs to be done with a lot of thought so that you're measuring the right thing. And I think everyone in this meeting appreciates the importance of measuring the right thing. QEDC, my organization, is working on some benchmarking tools for measuring the performance of different quantum computing platforms. And DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, is also in the process of starting a project in this area of benchmarking. There's a high need for the ability to verify and validate the performance of these enabling technologies. So even though you can buy various microwave electronics today, they really were not designed and they haven't been tested for operation in the conditions and environments that they're being placed. And so there's a need for testing and verification of the performance of components in the operation environment. And it's not just about hardware and the physical standards. There will need to be standards that link software and applications for running on various hardware platforms. Right now, there are a number of different hardware platforms under development. And at the same time, software is being developed, and you need an abstraction layer or compiler in between to allow software to run on these different hardware platforms. And so now is a good time to start thinking about what architectures are going to look like and what these intermediate layers what the requirements are for those layers. And ultimately, of course, interoperability will allow for innovation and for flourishing in the marketplace. I show here on the right a shot of just the title and author list from a publication out of QEDC on these performance benchmarks for quantum computing. It's on the archive, and you can find it there to see more about that project. So are we ready for standards? It's always sort of tricky to know when is the right time for standards. I think we all appreciate that you don't want to be too early, and you certainly don't want to be too late. So is now the time? Are we ready for quantum standards? This is a sort of a very dense slide that I'll go through. I got it from Barbara Goldstein at the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. And so at the top, she shows the technology readiness level scales. And I think we're all familiar with that, from the sort of basic research stage through prototyping and mature technologies, and then sort of the commercial and market-based stages. For quantum, there are a lot of different technologies, and they happen to fall at different technology readiness levels. So you have things that are fairly mature. You can buy a quantum annealer from D-Wave and other companies. Quantum key distribution is a fairly mature technology, and you can buy products to implement quantum key distribution in your network. But then you get to these other technologies that are not quite as far along, and quantum memory and quantum repeaters, as I mentioned earlier, are really still at the very basic research stage. At the same time, there is quite a lot of activity in various standards bodies, and I show some of them here. And that gives you a sense. I think this conveys a couple of things. One thing it clearly shows is that quantum standards are not the realm of just one single standards development organization. There are activities going on in many different standards bodies, and it will be necessary to, in some instances, somehow resolve and coordinate those activities, perhaps. I'll point out this software algorithm standard that's shown in the middle here, the NIST Post-Quantum Cryptographic Standard. This is a standard that's being developed with NIST leadership to come up with new cryptographic standards that need to be put in place in order to prevent the breaking of current encryption by quantum computers. This is a known vulnerability. It's quite a way in the future before such a computer will be available, but it also takes time to migrate to new standards, and so that process is well underway. So just a little bit about QEDC, and then I'll wrap up. QEDC has been around for just about 3 years. Its mission is to enable and grow the quantum industry. And we do that by identifying enabling technology gaps, workforce gaps, and even standards and metrics and benchmark gaps, and then trying to help fill those gaps. We work closely with government, and we try to inform those who are investing in quantum today, whether they are corporate or private or venture capital investors, or public investors like government programs. And we work to find ways to facilitate collaboration among the different parts of the ecosystem so that the people who are developing the enabling technology are working closely with the system developers and the software developers to accelerate progress. The membership of QEDC is now about 150 or 160 organizations, and it includes companies, but also universities, government laboratories, and other organizations, and all parts of the supply chain, from hardware developers to software developers and suppliers of components and so on. And it includes companies that are working in all of the application areas as well. And I'll just mention that QEDC has only been open to US-based companies up until now, but we just recently announced that we have started making membership available to non-US based companies, starting with 10 countries that are shown here. South Korea is not among those yet, but this list will be growing, and I look forward to being engaged with South Korean companies in the future. So thank you very much. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you, and I look forward to hearing the other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you once again for the great presentation, Ms. Merzbacher. 네, 너무나도 좋은 발표 잘
That was such a
들었습니다. 그럼
wonderful
이어서 바로
presentation.
다음 기술 발표를
So
들어보도록
the second
하겠습니다.
technical presentation will be
한국전자기술연구원의
delivered by Dr.
임승옥 본부장님께서
Sung-ok
발표를
Lim,
준비해
who's the Vice
주셨는데요.
President of the
인공지능
Communications and Media
윤리
R&D
표준화와
at
규제와
KT Korea
관련해서
Electronics
발표해
Technology
주시겠습니다.
Institute, who will
네,
talk
이미
about
무대 위로
transition
올라오셨는데
strategy on
큰 박수
ethics
한번
and AI in
부탁드리겠습니다.
Korea. Please welcome the speaker with a big round of applause.
이렇게 생겼습니다.
This is how I look
마스크만
like without
보시니까
the
저못
mask.
알아보실까 봐 잠깐
I
보여드렸습니다.
just wanted you to see my
네, 이런
face
그
without
좋은
the
자리에
mask
이렇게
on.
발표할 수 있는
I'd like to
기회를
thank the
너무
organizer
감사드리고요.
for inviting
저는
me to
이제
this very important forum.
한국전자기술연구원에서 근무하고 있는
I work at the Korea
오늘
Electronics
말씀드릴
Technology
내용은
Institute known as
인공지능
KETI. I am
윤리
Sung-ok
표준화
Lee. I will talk
규제
about
관련해서
AI
말씀드리도록
ethics standards and regulatory trends during my presentation.
네, 목차는 다음과
So
같고요.
this is the table of my presentation.
먼저
You can just
이제
refer to the
인공지능
slide.
윤리에 대해서 좀
So let me
말씀드리면
first give you an overview on
윤리는
AI
저희가 이제
ethics.
사회적 관계 속에서
Ethics
마땅히 지켜야 할
is
규범 등을 갖다 이렇게
a set
정의하고
of
있고요.
social norms
인공지능은
that have
역시
to be
그
complied
인간의
with.
뭐 지능이나
And
생태를
AI
이렇게 모사하는 거기 때문에
is about copying
인공지능에
the
대해서
intelligence of a
특히나
human
윤리적
being.
부분이
So
강조될 수밖에
ethical
없는
aspect
상황이고요.
becomes very critical
인공지능 윤리에
when
대한
it comes to
정의는
AI,
인공지능
and the
관련된 이해
definition
당사자들이
of
준수해야 될
ethics
규범으로 이제
shows
정의하고
universal
있는데요.
social norms
예를 들어서
that have to
인공지능은
be complied with
개발자뿐만
by the
아니라
stakeholders. So it's
제품,
applicable
이제
to
서비스
not only
제공자,
the
사용자까지의
developers but
전체
also the service
생태계에
users
인공지능을 사용하는 분들의
and also the products and
윤리적인
services
도덕 요건들을
across
좀
the whole
제시하고
of
있는 되겠고요.
ecosystem.
역시나 이제 악용적 사용들이
Of
사례가
course,
있기
there are
때문에
cases
이런
of malicious
부분들을 어떻게 잘 정의해서
use of
건전한
AI
시장을
that
만들
have
수
to be better
있을까라는 그
defined in order
측면에서
to create a better market
인공지능
environment.
굉장히 좀
In that
중요한
regards, the
부분
ethics
하나라고
for
볼 수가
AI
있겠습니다.
becomes a very important element.
네, 보시는 바와 같이
So as you can
인공지능은
see here,
60년 전부터 출현했으나
AI has been around for
알파고
about
이후로
60 years,
굉장히
but
크게
with the appearance of
발목성장해서
AlphaGo,
현재는
we have
4차
seen
산업혁명의
remarkable
핵심으로
advancement,
이제 부각되고 있고요.
and it is now becoming a core
보시는 바와 같이
technology in the fourth industrial
스마트폰에서부터
revolution era.
자동차,
So from
스피커
smartphones,
등등 법률 창작에까지
self-driving
굉장히
car,
다양한
speakers,
기술들,
and legal
기업
and
특성들,
creation
그리고
activities by different
강은
levels of
서비스별로
technology, by
굉장히
different
그
companies,
폭넓게
by
퍼져
different
있는
available
부분이고요.
services. We see
이러다 보니까
diverse
인공지능의
development
어떤
across
부작용에 대한
different
부분도
domains,
어쩌면
and it
좀
is
더
also
크게
resulting in
부각되고 있을
various
수도
side
있다고 볼
effects
수
as well.
있겠는데요. 잘 아시다시피 이제
You
딥페이크 같은 부분,
may have heard the
딥페이크는
deepfake
이제 인공지능이
technology.
사람을
This is
얼굴 같은 걸
AI
생성해서
creating
가짜로 이제
a
표현한 부분이
fake
있고요.
human
또
face
그 어떤 인공지능의 판단 오류를
misrepresenting
통해서 인간을
misrepresenting the
공격한다든가,
person. And there
그리고
were, for
또
example, attacks
인공지능의
done by
어떤 그
AI
인간의 공격성을
by
드러내는
not
부분들,
recognizing the
이런 부분들이
person
이제 발생하고
clearly.
있고요.
And also we
기술의
see an
범위가
increase in
넓어지면
hostility
넓어질수록
amongst
어떤
AI.
윤리적 문제나 법적 문제가
We see
계속
the wider the
대두될
scope of
거라고
AI
판단하고
technology
있습니다.
services in the future, the higher the
또한 이제
likelihood of
공정성과
ethical and
합리성에
legal
대한 부분도
issues
계속
will
대두되고
arise.
있습니다.
And
예를
there are
들어서 이제
also a lot
인공지능
of
같은
attention
경우는
paid to fairness and rationality.
결정된
Now,
사항에서
AI
어떻게 결정되는지
focuses on
알 수
decisions
있는
made.
사례가 좀 작기 때문에
However, it's
이
very
결정
difficult for
사례에 대한
humans
어떤
to
설명
understand how the
가능성이
decision decision-making has actually been done. So we really need to see the development of explainable AI.
가짜 리뷰를 인공지능에
And for
달아가지고
example,
리뷰를
fake
건당
reviews can be done.
5천에서
And
만
per,
원을
for
받아서
example,
리뷰를
review,
가짜 리뷰로
5,000 to
맛집으로 등급시키는
10,000 won is paid
이런
for
것들이
fake review
실제로
to,
입출력 데이터에 대한 신뢰성,
for
그리고
example,
의무적인
disguise a certain
공정성
restaurant as a
합리성이
very popular
인공지능 통해서
restaurant.
이렇게 답보될 수 있느냐.
So we need to develop AI ethics standards that are needed for the guidelines for ensuring safety and reliability in
보시는 바와
terms of
같이
verification
인공지능은
methods.
의료 CCTV,
So medical
금융,
treatment,
그리고 이제
CCTV,
일반
financial
가정뿐만
sector,
아니라
general
굉장히
household
다양한
appliances,
부분까지
and in
확산되고
various
있는
areas we
상황이고요.
see the
이런
emergence of
부분에서 이제
AI.
시민들의 우려사항들이 좀 있을 수가 있습니다.
And that's also
시민
leading to a lot of
감시와
social
통제,
concerns, especially in
윤리적
terms of
판단에
monitoring,
불과한
like a big brother, and
일자리
also
문제라든지
not able to
인공지능
control
판단에
AI,
의존되는
and also
비실에서
issues in terms of
등등이 있는데
employment,
이런 부분들을 이제
and
정책적
also lack
지원과
of reliability
기술적
in
지원으로
judgment.
해결하게
We need
되면
to support
저희가
this through
궁극적으로 보고
technical
있는
as well as
좀더
legal
스마트하지만
development,
인간에게 좀더
so that
안전하고
we can
유익한
make
형태의
AI
인공지능으로
a
만들 수
smart
있다.
tool, but
라는
also
것이
something that is beneficial for
인공지능
human
윤리의 어떤 범위와
beings. That would be
필요성이
the scope and the need necessary for
다음은
developing the
인공지능
AI
표준화
ethics.
개발 동향에 대해서 말씀드리도록
Now let
하겠습니다.
me go over the AI standardization development trend.
먼저 이제 인공지능 이슈는
As for
2019년
the
가토에서
issues,
10대 이슈 중에 하나로
Gartner
Digital Ethics and Privacy라는 거
issued a
주제로
paper
제시가
called
됐고요.
Digital Ethics and
그리고
Privacy
이제 글로벌 IT
as one of the
기업들도
top issues in
인공지능 데이터에 대한
2019, and
활용,
global
윤리
IT
원칙
companies are
등등을 좀
proposing
발표하고 있는 상황입니다.
ethical principles
OECD
for the
같은
use of
경우는
AI
이제 아직은
data.
법적
And
구성력이
also the
없지만
OECD,
사회적
although
책임을 부과하기
the
위해서
guideline is not
다음과
legally
같은 포인트의
binding,
고대점을 포함하고
established
있습니다.
the OECD
기술적,
development
법적,
recommendation
윤리적,
focusing on
사회적,
technical, legal,
사회적이라면
and
일자리가
ethical
굉장히
issues as
필요성이
well as social
이런
aspects,
네
which
가지
are
포인트에
pretty
대해서
much
좀 고려하고 있는
related to the
상황이고요.
job development.
기술적으로 봤을 때는
And
어떤
from the
기술에 대한
technical point of
투명성과
view,
설명 가능성,
transparency and
법적으로 봤을
explainability, and from a
어떤
legal
그
point
인간을
of view,
위반하는 그런 알고리즘들을
violation of human beings
불가능하게 하는 그런
using the algorithms,
윤리적으로는 이제 인간의
possible to create
존엄성과
algorithms that
통제
violate
가능성이
human
가능하게
law,
되는
and
이런
ethical. It is about
일자리를
ensuring
어떻게 하면 AI와
the dignity
공존할
of
수
human
있겠느냐
life.
하는 이런 부분들에 대한
And
그
social
주요
aspect is
논의
about
포인트로서 제시하고 있습니다.
having a shared growth between humans and AI, especially in terms of job
다음은 이제
creation,
국제
employment.
표준 기구입니다. ISO,
Now
IEC,
we
JTC1,
see
SC42가
IEC, JTC1, SC42 is standardization bodies that is fit for the purpose of developing artificial intelligence. They deal with machine learning as well as other areas. There are about 12 different areas of standardization, for example, interoperability, domains, safety, security, privacy, and so forth. Now, Working Group 7 focuses on truthfulness, which deals with the ethics of AI.
다음은 이제
Next.
IEC SEG10 부분 되겠습니다.
This is IEC SEG 10.
라고 해서
This is
기존에는
assistance
TC,
work.
그러니까 테크니컬 레벨별로의 어떤
For
표준화가
we had
있었다
standardization done
향후
at
이제
TC level,
점점
but going
서비스의
forward,
발달과 기술의
there's a lot of
발달
development in
통해서
service and
사실은 이제
technology.
TC 간의 시스템적인
So there's a
접근이
TC
필요하다고
to
해서
TC systematic
IEC는
approach
시스템
needed.
워크
So
그런
IEC
그런
has
기구를
put in
좀
place
구축하고
this
있고요.
SEC
그중에 이제
body for
SEG라는
standards
스탠다드
evaluation group. SEG10 stands for Standards Evaluation Group. Before we move to the systems committee, this is a mid-level gap analysis use case evaluation team that would try to analyze the interests of the stakeholder parties. And in 2019, this was established in the name of SEG10. They look at the identification standards and also provide systematic architecture. And 25 countries are currently taking part as members.
SEG10이 최근에
SEG10 is now showing some new movement. On the 18th of May 2021, they had a meeting to report a request to switch to advisory committee of SEG10. So what does it mean that they have made a request to switch to AC of SEG10? Advisory committee is established, for example, to look at important issues in the 7IC's robot, environment, EMC, energy safety, security, and power transmission and distribution. So they deal with these most important issues. And the advisory committee cannot, for example, if there's no enforcement of the regulations, the AC would be able to, for example, exert a great influence when there's when it is impossible to enforce compliance with the current standards for possible problems in the future. Next, I would like to talk about another international body, IEEE. By 2018 year-end, they created 11 AI-related working groups, deal with personal privacy, verification of AI bias, and shared system biases with the artificial intelligence. And this working group is making a lot of progress in this regard. Let's take a look at the movements in the Korean market. SK, Samsung, and Naver, and the 배달의 민족, the people of delivery, the brothers of delivery, they're very much present in the AI space. So what are the issues that they have? So they look at, for example, moral issues in terms of the lack of stability, and also the misuse and abuse of the system. And there is also a lack of trust issue, privacy, big bio, and also problems in terms of the existence of human beings. And also there's ungrounded fear as well of the technology. We need to be able to address them effectively so that we can better respond to the needs of the market, and also to address various technical bottlenecks. And to respond to this need, we have launched AI Ethics Standardization Forum in December 2020, joined by Samsung, LG, SKD, various stakeholders from the industry. There are about 50 experts joining the effort. There are 4 different subcommittees. One on electrical and electronic services, autonomous vehicle, robot, and legal ethics division, and compliance division. As for the contents, we develop AI ethics guidelines and also institutionalize conformity assessment so that guidelines can be usable and applicable to the industry users. That is the main goal of the forum. To share with you the results of our efforts. As for the AI ethics, there are many cases. So use case analysis was our key priority. And if use cases are identified using different methods, we wanted to do it in a standardized way. So we developed the template. So the ecosystem stakeholders, for example, the producers and the users, and all of the elements that could arise from different levels of the usage. There are about 10 different templates that we have used. And we will be able to develop about 10 more use cases per year. Electrical and electronic area, we're now developing a guideline for the AI ethics. The basic concept over here is we will look at the life cycle of the electrical and electronic products. For example, from the start to use to the scrap of the products. We first set up an AI ethics framework. Based on that, we would analyze the usage by life cycle and to develop a very detailed checklist. And then we would have a post-mortem checklist done. I'll try to give further details on this. First of all, for the AI ethics framework, depending on the stage of the life cycle of the products, we list up all of the usages by life cycle. And on the right side, there are, for example, conformity, responsibility, transparency, and different elements that become a critical part in the ethics guideline. And then if you look at the life cycle-based checklist, for example, from the stage of development, the developers would have to look at transparency, stability, controllability, expandability, and so forth. There are different elements to be checked per different user in the stage. And then on the more detailed checklist, there are different areas to be checked. For example, the principles and whether all of the compliance is being ensured, or whether there's any legal ground to be reviewed as well. So for the distributors, users, as well as developers, are able to evaluate where they are in terms of complying with the checklist. And this is going to be a complete and a very consistent set of criteria. Now, let me move on to talk about the policy trends and also the regulatory trends, especially that we see with the European countries centering around EU. And in 2016 and 17, the United States established a voluntary code of ethics
2020년 4월
And in 2020, in April, IEEE published a guidance on using AI algorithms. As for China, in June 2019, National Next Generation Artificial Intelligence Management Special Committee announced the 8 principles for next generation AI management. As for Japan, in March 2019, they announced principles for realizing human-centered AI society, which are broken down into AI social principles, development principles, and principles of using AI. In Korea, in 2017, Knowledge Information Society ethics guidelines were announced, and Korea Communications Commission announced the 7 principles of AI ethics in 2019, and also in 2020, AI national strategy dealing with the AI dysfunctions such as deepfakes was announced.
최근에 가장 그 강력하게 지금
And
제한되고
recently,
있는 부분은 EU에서의
a strong movement is being monitored around the EU. They unveiled the AI regulations in April 2021. The risks are broken down into 4 different levels. For example, so they're basically banning all AI that can threaten human life and livelihood and to comply with obligations such as preliminary evaluation before launching of the AI services. Risk levels are classified into unacceptable, high, limited, and minimal risks. And there are definitions for each risk level. For example, in the case of unacceptable risk, this is to fully ban the AI system that interfere with user-free will by manipulating human behavior. For example, toys using voice assistants encouraging risky behaviors in minors. And high risks have various preconditions that would have to be met to be defined as such. If there's, for example, a full understanding about the AI risks, then such products can be used. And infrastructure such as hospital, product safety, robot-assisted surgical functions, critical infrastructures are included here as examples. And the limited risks is related to certain transparency and obligations. For example, if you're using a chatbot service, you have to make sure that you're aware that they're communicating with the machine. And you can use the AI based on the limited risk assessment. And minimal risk is a technology that utilizes AI technology in various areas. For example, video games and anti-spam features.
이 레귤레이션의 가장 강력한 부분은
So
처벌 기준이
it's very interesting that the penalty
예를 들어서 이제
area is
금지성을
very
이용했을
strong.
때는 기업 같은
For
경우는
example, if you violate the law, there will be 6% of global annual sales to be paid as a fine. Breach of duty of care, 4% of global annual sales. Fees will be imposed. Hazardous information distribution, 2% of global annual sales to be paid as a fee. So for countries and institutions, that's translated into 30 million euros for violation of prohibition, and 20 million euros for the breach of duty of care, and 10 million euros for the hazardous information distribution.
EU의 AI 규제권은
And
사실은
the EU's AI regulation
디지털 서비스 법하고
is actually interpreted as an extension from the Digital Services Act and the Digital Market Act that were available in the market already. We need to be able to proactively respond to these regulations so that we can better position ourselves in the global market.
결론 말씀드리도록 하겠습니다.
So, final part, my concluding remarks.
윤리는
So, AI ethics is not really about regulation, but I think we need to have a voluntary operation of the AI ethics in order to create an enabling environment so that it can expand through self-cleansing mechanism. So, for example, a black box that is used for aircrafts. You use that after the accident occurs to analyze the root cause of such accident through traceability, tracking. Now, the aircraft carriers were very much opposed to that, and they showed much backlash. But actually, that led to remarkable advancement in aircraft-related technology, paradoxically. So the challenges on the other side lie opportunities, and AI ethics themselves could lead to further development in AI technology and could also promote a positive ecosystem as a catalyst. And with that, I will conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.
네, 본부장님 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Vice President.
블랙박스의 예시를 들어주시니까
So the example of a black box for the aircraft was very relevant, I think.
이슈를 오히려 앞으로
AI
AI가
ethics
더
could
발전할 수
be
있도록
utilized as an
활용할 수
opportunity
있는 계기가
for
되었으면
bringing further
좋겠습니다.
development in AI
네, 그럼 바로
technology. So
이어서
thank you very
다음
much.
발표도 청해 보도록 하겠습니다.
Let us
다음
move on to the
순서는
next
미국
presentation, which will be made
본부장을
by
맡고
Mr.
계시는
Phil
피케라님께서
Piquera from the
자율자동차의 기술
UL
표준화 및
of the
인증을
US.
주제로
He will
발표를
be
해주실
talking
텐데요.
about standardization for sustainability and future-ready mobility. Once again, he will join us online.
Are you here and can you hear me?
Well, good morning and good evening to my American colleagues. First of all, before I start, I'd like to thank Mr. Sang-Hoon Lee, the CATS administrator. I would like to thank Mr. Joe Batia, the ANSI president and CEO. And I would like to thank Mr. James Kim, the AmCham Korea chair. And I would also like to thank Mr. Andrew Harib for their very uplifting and positive congratulatory remarks. I would also like to thank the ANSI and CATS organizers for inviting me to this forum. I think it's a tremendous opportunity and I'm very proud and honored to have been invited. First of all, my name is Philip Piquera, and I'm the Vice President of Global Standards for Underwriters Laboratories. I also happen to be the Chairman of the Board of Directors for the American National Standards Institute. So Joe Batia and I are very good friends and we work very closely together. What I would like to talk about tonight deals with a little bit broader topic than autonomous vehicles. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that are that we're all facing in the area of mobility and the transportation industry. I'd like to also, what I would also like to mention is that this industry, like most industries, is facing a number of challenges and disruptions. And I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about what those challenges are and offer the Underwriters Laboratories perspective on how we might address those pain points that are being faced by our consumers. So with that, if you can move on to the next slide. Before I start, let me introduce Underwriters Laboratories to the audience first. We are a global safety science organization. We're 127 years old. We were established in 1894, and we actually developed our first standard in 1903. And at UL, we actually have two separate organizations. We have our Business Solutions organization, which is really one of the largest conformity assessment organizations in the world. And then we have our nonprofit organization, of which I am part of. And in this nonprofit, we deal with standards development, we deal with research, and we also deal with education and outreach. And then I would like to, if we can move on to the next slide. I'd like to also spend a few minutes talking a little bit about some of the numbers that are important to understand Underwriters Laboratories. We have a portfolio of over 1,700 standards. We have over 400 UL standards technical committees, which are called technical panels. We also have approximately 4,000 volunteers that sit on these technical committees. And of those 4,000, 20% of them are located outside of the United States, because we believe that it's very important that we have a very broad international perspective on our standards development. And of those 1,000 volunteers that come from outside of the United States, 40 of them are from Korea. And we're represented by 60 countries on our technical committees. And we have a staff of about 80 standards professionals to support this very broad work that we do. Next slide. This chart shows a little bit of the footprint that our international team has. We're responsible for global outreach, and we're located physically in the United States, in Canada, in Mexico, in Denmark, in Singapore, in the Middle East, India, and I think I said, and China, of course. So we have a fairly broad team, and we also have a regional standards manager, Mr. Colin Lowe, who's actually advancing the slides for me this evening, who is located in Singapore and supports our Korean outreach efforts. And working with Colin is a young lady by the name of Amy Sim, who is also involved and responsible for Korean outreach. So we have a very broad international team that's ready to support our partners overseas. Next slide, Colin. I would also like to say that we are very involved in the support of harmonization of standards and regulations. And in that capacity, we are accredited by the American National Standards Institute in the US. We are accredited by Standards Council of Canada in Canada. And we are authorized by DGN in Mexico to develop standards. So we're unique in that we're the only SDO that is capable of developing standards and are accredited to develop standards in all 3 countries of North America. But we also believe very strongly in international participation. And so we participate very heavily in the IEC and in ISO. In the IEC, for example, Jim Shannon, who is the chairman of the UL Board of Directors, is a former IEC president. Sonia Bird, who leads our international standards team, is a member of the IEC Standardization Management Board and is a USNC vice president. We have the secretaries of IEC TC61, TC72, and TC108. And in addition to that, we have 150 experts that are members of IEC technical committees. And at the same time, we also have about 90 experts that are participating in ISO technical committees. I would also say that we believe very strongly in collaboration. And so we have collaboration agreements with other SDOs such as SAE, IEEE, and ASTM. Colin, next slide. We also believe that it's very important in order to support our global safety mission that we understand the importance of collaborating with our national standards bodies around the world. And so we started a number of years ago a collaboration program with all of our partners. And today, I'm very proud to announce that we have over 68 memorandums of understandings with national standards bodies around the world. In this part of the world, in Korea, Asia, Australasia, we have MOUs that we've signed in China, India, Indonesia, Philippines, New Zealand, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. Next chart, Colin. So now I want to talk a little bit about the challenges and pain points of urban mobility, because in order to find solutions, we need to understand what exactly those pain points are. First, the world is becoming more urbanized. Today, 55% of the world's population reside in urban areas, and it's expected that this proportion will increase to 68% by 2050. We are going to see more crowded megacities, and that's going to result in more congestion and longer time to commute to work. And as such, there are a number of solutions that are needed to deal with this trend. We need to develop an intelligent and efficient transportation system in order to reduce traffic congestion and commute time. We've also realized from studies that have been done, such as the study done by the Boston Consulting Group, that consumers are looking for increased productivity and multitasking while they're commuting to work if they can. And they're looking for systems that are both flexible and mobile and provide a very meaningful service. And part of that flexibility mobility may be providing different solutions dealing with what's referred to as micro mobility, which would be e-scooters and e-bikes, for example. Next chart. Another challenge and pain point that the transportation industry is facing is in the area of pollution and environmental impact. With more populous cities, there will be a higher demand for vehicles, which will inevitably result in more emission beyond what would be considered acceptable. And that will also create problems as far as global climate change, for example. The same research, statistics show that 3/4 of the emissions that occur from transportation come from road vehicles. And the same research from the Boston Consulting Group indicated that this area, pollution and environmental impact, is the most important pain point voted on by consumers. So the solutions that are needed for this particular challenge is, can we transition from internal combustion engine vehicles to low emission alternatives, such as electric vehicles, and use more micromobility with less carbon emission for short distances? And then, of course, the circular economy is a challenge that's looking for a solution. Battery-powered electric vehicles are not without their own problems. Lithium batteries degrade over time. So we need to start planning how to deal with the retired electric vehicle batteries that a circular economy will need if we're indeed going to have a sustainable planet. Next chart. And then finally, there's the challenge of safety and health. There's more traffic will in all likelihood result in more traffic accidents, which have become the modern killer. And the problem occurs both in developed and developing countries. For those of us who travel around the world, we would certainly recognize that sometimes it's in developing countries that the traffic congestion is even worse than in developed countries. So what are the solutions that we need in order to be able to deal with this challenge? Well, we need intelligent transportation, which will allow us to be able to prevent accidents. It has been learned that driver error is a major cause of road accidents. That includes distracted driving, it includes reckless driving, speeding, running red lights, stop signs, and fatigue. And more traffic congestion will certainly cause more accidents. And as I mentioned before, emission by road vehicles also cause air pollution. And so we're going to need a transition to low emission vehicles. And as I said before, and when I talked about the circular economy, we need safety standards and certification of lithium batteries in order to be able to decrease the problems that occur from the degradation of lithium batteries, for example. Next slide. So at Underwriters Laboratories, we have conducted independent research and developed standards which we think can serve as a solution to address these pain points and support sustainable transportation. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about some of the solutions that we have come up with and that are available for people to be able to review. Next slide. So autonomous vehicles. First, I am very pleased to share that UL Standards has led the way in developing requirements for autonomous vehicles. UL oversaw the development and publication of UL 4600, which is the standard for safety for the evaluation of autonomous products. The safety benefits of automated vehicles are paramount. Automated vehicles potentially can save lives and reduce injuries, and that's rooted in one very critical and important fact. 94% of serious crashes are due to human error. Automated vehicles have the potential to remove human error from the crash equation, which will certainly help drivers and passengers, in addition to bicycles and pedestrians. Autonomous vehicles are also a good solution to answer consumers' demand for productivity and multitasking. Our vision at UL is to give passengers peace of mind when they take a fully autonomous vehicle, and so that they can focus on their work while they're driving, while not worried about the safety consequences associated with that. I would also say that autonomous vehicles is very new, as we all know. So governments around the world are monitoring and supporting consensus standard development and encouraging AV companies to adopt standards. The examples on this slide are from the US Department of Transportation's Automated Vehicle Comprehensive Plan and the World Economic Forum's guidance publication on creating safe autonomous policies. Next slide, Colin. Electric vehicles is another solution that is in front of us. Electric vehicles have a lot of benefits, and especially the green credentials, which everyone is aware of. It's better for environment and health. And UL has developed a series of standards, which are shown on this chart, dealing with electric vehicle batteries, dealing with charging system, motor, cables, plugs, and components to support the safety and interoperability of electric vehicles. And also to reap the full green benefits of electric vehicles, we need to ensure that they run on clean energy sources, such as solar and wind energy. But unfortunately, these energy sources are notoriously intermittent and uncontrollable. So we need to have this technology supported by energy storage systems. So we developed standards at UL for photovoltaic and wind turbines, and our UL 9540 is the industry leading standard for energy storage systems and equipment. Next slide, Tom. So I've mentioned the circular economy during my presentation. As EVs, electric vehicles, are becoming more common, we also need to think ahead and prepare for the handling of retired EV batteries. We need to adopt a circular economy model, rethink the design and life cycle of a battery. We also need to be able to recognize that it's important to repurpose these batteries. So we have one of the major obstacles that we have recognized at UL is that that people who are using repurposed batteries are concerned about their safety. So we developed UL 1974, which provides users with added assurance that second life batteries are safe. We've also developed UL 3600, which helps organizations to quantify and report on their circularity. And then we've also developed UL 2799, which provides a framework for the evaluation and verification of entities' waste to landfill issues. Next slide, Colin. I also mentioned micromobility. It's also another important solution for sustainable transportation. And it includes e-scooters and e-bikes. They are resource-efficient options for short distances. They are affordable, and they are also inclusive for all walks of life. So, and they're flexible. And they will support the low carbon commute, which makes it a good solution for smart cities. So in response to the growing explosion of accidents that have happened as a result of micromobility products during their early stages of commercialization, our team has worked to develop the world's first standard on micromobility products, UL 2272, which has been widely recognized globally in places such as North America, Singapore, Vietnam, and Australia. And again, we're going to need to develop more and more products more and more standards as we deal with more and more of those micromobility products. Next slide, Colin. So as we deal with the problems associated with the disruption that innovation causes, it's important to also recognize that innovation has a high cost in the beginning, and it's not sustainable from an economic point of view. So it's important for us to be able to lower the cost in order to move into mass production. So standardization helps innovation to be able to transition from niche products to mass market through the process of efficiency and economy of scale, all at the same time of not compromising the safety issues that are associated with new products. Next slide, Colin. So finally, what I would like to also offer my audience tonight is that UL offers a free digital view of UL standards. And we do this because it facilitates the public viewing of UL standards that are referenced in public policies. It raises the awareness of what is required in a standard to a wider group of stakeholders, such as academia, consumers, product designers, and innovators. And as a result of digital view, they can be accessed by anyone around the world. We have found, since we've offered digital view of our standards, that a good percentage of the views that we see are taking place overseas. And we believe that this is important to helping us to further the UL mission and commitment to public safety. And if anybody is interested And in the UL's free digital view, you can go to www.shopulstandards.com and then take a look at our entire portfolio of standards. Next slide, Connor. So finally, in closing, I'd like to summarize the issues and the solutions through 3 pillars. And those pillars are in the environment, their society, and they're the economy. In the area of the environment, we need solutions that provide clean, low emission, and minimum waste generation. The societal issues require those solutions to be inclusive, affordable, flexible, and safe for all. And as far as economy is concerned, it's important that we provide the proper guidance for disruptive innovation, that we enable guidance for the creation of new demand drivers, and most importantly, we support responsible consumption. And we believe very strongly at UL that standards support sustainable and will allow us to make the future ready for mobility as we move into that future. So thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Well, thank you once again, Vice President Piquera, for the great presentation. 네, 너무나도 좋은 발표 잘 들어봤습니다.
It was such an informative
특히나도 이
presentation,
표준화하는 작업이
and especially the work of
제품을
standardization is transforming products in a niche market into mass market products, which would contribute to achieving economy of scale, and that would also ensure safety for everybody. I was very impressed by your remarks.
네, 그럼 이어서 다음 발표를 들어보도록 하겠습니다.
We will
다음은
move on
반도체
to the next
산업협회의
presentation from
안기현 전문님께서 준비해
KSIA, which is a Korean
주셨습니다.
Semiconductor
안정적
Industry
공급망을
Association.
위한
Executive Director
반도체
An
기술
Gi-hyun will
표준
talk
협력
about the
주제로
Korean
발표해
semiconductor
주시겠습니다.
industry
큰
and its
박수
standardization
부탁드립니다.
activities. Please welcome the speaker with a big round of applause.
예, 한국 반도체 산업협회
I am the Executive Director, Ki-hyun An, from the Korean
제가 오늘
Semiconductor
준비한
Industry
내용은
Association known as
한국 반도체
KSIA.
산업 현황과
I will give you an overview on the current status of the
정책,
Korean
표준화
semiconductor
활동에
industry
대한
and standards or standardization
준비를
policies and the major
일단
trends that we see in
이
this regard.
발표 내용을 시작하기 전에
Before I begin my
저희
presentation in earnest,
반도체 산업이 갖고 있는
I would like to talk
숙제부터
about
먼저
some of the tasks or the
말씀드리겠습니다.
challenges that confront
올해
the
1월
Korean semiconductor
달에
industry.
이 나온
In
뉴스가
January this year,
차량용
there was a big
반도체
news
부족해서
that there was a lack of
자동차
semiconductor
생산이
chips
중단된
for
사례가
vehicles,
있습니다.
which led to disruptions in the
이
production
문제가
of
아직
vehicles
해결이
as a
안
result, and the
됐고요.
problem still remains
자동차뿐만
as
아니고
is, and it is
지금은
having an
휴대폰,
effect on not
또
only the
PC, 또
OEMs and as
가전제품까지
well as
확산이
PCs,
되어
as well as home appliances and the home
반도체
mobile phones as
공급
well.
부족 사태가
So due to a lack
우리
of
사회에
supply of
이
semiconductor
부정적
chips to the
영향으로
industries,
인해서
there have been a lot of
상당히
negative
우리
implications
사회가
on the
원활히
overall industries as well as our
움직이는데
daily lives,
불편함을 많이
which is causing a lot of
겪고 있습니다.
inconvenience to
그래서
people
반도체 산업에서는
in the world. So
반도체
our
공급
semiconductor
안정을
industry
위해서
is trying very
상당
hard
부분
to
고민을
stabilize
하고
the
있고
supply of
또 투자
semiconductor
활동도
chips. In that
진행되고
regard,
있습니다.
we're executing a lot
제가
of capital
오늘
expenditures
아침부터
as
계속
well.
이 표준에 대한 주제를 갖고
So we're
발표를
dealing with the
들었습니다.
topic of
사실 저는
standardization
반도체
from
산업에
early
있는
today.
사람이기 때문에
I'm a person representing the Korean
전문가는
semiconductor
아닙니다.
industry, so I may
그래서
not be
아침
as
내내
knowledgeable
쭉
as
표준에
you
관한 내용을
in
들어봤는데
standardization. Now that I've been sitting in the audience listening to the presentations, believe that standardization could promote the stabilization of semiconductor chip distribution in the market. I think we could really think about these issues together. Because as for the supply chains, capital expenditure is required, which is actually seen as one of the ways in which we can deal with these disruptions. But it really requires a long-term horizon and perspective. We cannot just set up the fab facilities overnight. It takes at least 3 years. That means we would have to endure this inconvenience for the next 3 years. And the problem may go on for more than 3 years, 5 to 6, 7 years, until we really see a fully stable supply chain. And in that regard, I hope we can bring expertise from the standards sector. in
대한민국
trying to address this
반도체
issue.
기업들이
Let's take a look at the
분포되어
Korean
있는 곳입니다.
semiconductor companies and how they're
대한민국
distributed
반도체
across the country.
산업은
Now, the
반도체
semiconductor
제조
industry
시설을 중심으로 분포가
is
되어 있고요.
developed around the
주로
manufacturing fabs.
수도권에 많이
Most of
분포가
them
되어
are
있습니다.
located in the Seoul and
지역별로
metropolitan
보면
area.
기흥,
By region, we have
화성,
Gihung,
평택,
Hwasong, Pyeongtaek,
용인,
Yongin,
청주를
and
중심으로
Cheongju,
분포가 되어 있고 그리고
where
R&D
these
시설은
industries are
판교를
located.
중심으로
And R&D
분포가 되어
center
있습니다.
is distributed centering on Pangyo, which is a city that is
대한민국
near the Seoul
반도체
capital city.
산업은
Now, the
대한민국
Korean semiconductor
제조
industry,
산업 또 대한민국 경제
well,
또
it's
세계
very
시장에서
important for the
중요한
manufacturing
역할을
industry and
하고
for the Korean
있습니다.
economies, as well
세계
as the world
시장에서
economy at large.
공급의 약 한
In the
20%
world
가까이
economy,
공급을
about
하고
20%
있습니다.
of supply comes from the
메모리
Korean
반도체가
semiconductor industry.
56% 이상,
Memory semiconductor
세계
accounts for more than
공급을 하고 있어서
56%
세계
in the global
시장에서도
market.
상당히 중요한
So
역할을 하고 있습니다.
It plays a very crucial
대한민국
role
경제에
in the global
있어서는
market. What about
수출의
for
약
the
20%
Korean
가까이
economy? They
담당을
represent
하고
about
있습니다.
20% of Korea's
그래서 금액으로
total
보면
export,
1,000억 불
and in terms of
이상
amount, that's more than 100 billion
담당을 하고
Korean won
그리고
of exports.
투자도 20조 원 이상
In terms of
투자를
investment,
하고
more than
있기
20
때문에
trillion won
상당히 이
is
투자에
being
대한
executed.
부분도 다른 산업에 비해서
So compared to other
매우 큰 역할을
industries,
하고 있습니다.
this particular investment in semiconductor becomes
저희
very important.
생산입니다. 생산은
Now let's take a look
작년
at production
2020년
volume.
기준으로
As of last year,
870억
2020,
불을
the
하고
total
있습니다.
semiconductor production total about 87 billion US
2019년보다
dollars. So compared to 2019, we saw a growth of over
올해
10%.
아직 끝나지 않았습니다만
The year
작년
hasn't come to the end
기준보다
yet,
20%
but
이상
compared to last year, year on year,
생산이
the
증가할
production
걸로 그렇게
is expected
예측이
to
되고
increase by more than about 20%.
반도체 분야별입니다.
This is
크게
by sector
반도체를
of the
세 분야로
semiconductor.
나누고
We
있습니다.
can break it down
메모리
into three
반도체,
classifications:
시스템
memory,
IC,
system
반도체,
IC.
그리고
So
우리는
memory
개별 소자라고
semiconductors and system
불리는데
ICs
옵토, 광
and
쪽,
individual
또 센서
opto,
쪽, 그리고
sensor,
디스크리트.
and discrete.
그래서 OSD라고
We call
표현합니다.
it OSD,
세 분야로 나누는데
semiconductors.
대한민국 반도체 산업은
The
메모리
Korean
반도체
semiconductor
중심으로
industry
산업이
is
형성이 되어 있습니다.
formed centering
시스템
on memory
반도체와
semiconductors.
OSD
As for
부분은
system IC and
상대적으로
OSDs, they're relatively
취약합니다.
weak compared to the memory side.
참고로
And
시장에서
for your
제일
reference,
큰 비중을 차지하는
The
것이
biggest
시스템
share
IC입니다.
is accounted for
그리고
by
현재
system
공급
IC.
부족에
And also
가장
the
큰
supply shortage
부분을 차지하는 게
is mainly
시스템
attributed
반도체라고
by
이해를
system
해주시면 될 것 같습니다.
semiconductors.
한국에 있는 반도체
This is a list
기업입니다.
of semiconductor
제일 큰
companies
기업이
in Korea.
삼성전자,
Of course, the biggest company here
그리고
is Samsung
SK
Electronics
하이닉스입니다.
Company and
그
SK
외에도
Hynix.
반도체를
Other than that,
설계하는 기업,
we have
또
design companies for
중견
semiconductors
기업
as well
수준의
as
반도체
mid-level,
제조회사들도
mid-tier
포함이
semiconductor
되어 있습니다.
manufacturing companies
주로
included in the
삼성전자,
list.
SK
Mostly,
하이닉스
Samsung
중심으로
Electronics and SK Hynix are the two
산업이 형성이
major
되어
players
있습니다만
in the
나머지
semiconductor
기업들도
sector,
상당히 많은
but other
수가
companies,
있습니다.
we see
상대적으로
a
규모가
multitude of
작아서
them. They're just smaller in
저희가 잘
scale,
드러나 있지 않습니다만
so they may not be as apparent as other
한국의
big
반도체
players.
산업은 메모리
But the
반도체,
Korean
시스템
semiconductor
반도체,
industry, we have
그리고
memory
개별
system
소자,
semiconductors as well
또
as the
소재 부품
OCDs,
장비 회사들 전
OSDs,
분야에
as well as
반도체 산업이
components and parts
형성돼 있다고 이해를
makers.
주시면 될 것 같습니다.
So we're across the whole horizon of semiconductor
전
industry.
세계에서 반도체를 가장 많이
In the
공급하는
world,
국가는
the biggest
미국입니다.
supply
전
comes from
세계에
the United States
50%
for
이상 공급을
semiconductor
하고
because they
있습니다.
supply
이
more than
기준은
50% of semiconductors
제조
to
기준은
the
아니고
global
브랜드
market,
기준으로
not based
이해를
on
해주십시오.
manufacturing volume, but
그리고
based on
그다음이
brand.
이제 대한민국이고
And
그리고
which is followed by Korea
일본,
and
타이완,
Japan,
유럽,
Taiwan,
중국,
Europe,
뭐 이런
and China.
국가들이 10% 이내에서
They have about 10% of
시장을
market share
중점을
respectively.
하고 있습니다. 그중에 메모리 반도체는 대한민국이
And memory
57%를
semiconductor
공급을
portion,
하고 있고
Korea
그다음
supplies
미국이
57%, followed by the
28%를
United
공급하고
States
있어서
with
한국과
28%.
미국이
So Korea and the United States are the top players in supplying memory semiconductors. As for system ICs, 70% is represented by US firms. Their market dominance is very powerful, and also from the point of standards, I believe that the US is leading the way. In these systems IC, there are design companies called fabless, and there are manufacturing companies called foundry. So fabless design companies and foundry companies, the manufacturers, are playing important roles in the current market landscape, especially the system, the design companies have become very strong in the marketplace, and it is very important to establish manufacturing foundries, especially from the long-term point of view. Now on the left side, we see fabless companies, the design companies. The US is the strongest player in this regard. 1.6% of market share is owned by Korean firms. Korea, for system IC, has put in place a promotion policy and is also pursuing the policy very actively. Also for the supply stability, the system IC is not only important for the US but for other countries as well. There has to be a fuller supply, not only from the US but from other countries. And if we can put that in the perspective of standardization, the US is now dominating the system IC, probably in the standardization as well. So we need to further promote cooperation with the US to bring stability to the value chain. Next is the equipment and materials market, not from the supply side, but from the demand side. Across the world, the country that buys the largest amount of equipment is Korea. We have memory semiconductor-driven industry, which requires continuous investment. So we need to make actually more investment than the investment that has already been executed. So Korea is the largest purchaser of semiconductor-related equipment. Next is materials. These are feed materials that are used for the production of semiconductors. So they're as large as the production facilities for the semiconductors. Taiwan is number one. Second is Korea. So Korea's semiconductor industry is known for making lots of investment. There is a 10-year long-term investment plan in place and currently being executed. The left photo shows the Samsung Pyeongtaek cluster. So in a region called Pyeongtaek, Samsung is now in the process of constructing a large fab facility. And this is the right photo shows the Yongin cluster currently being developed or to be developed by SK hynix. So a plan was announced. The groundbreaking hasn't been done, but next year they're going to start constructing, and over the 10-year-long investment plan has been announced. And if the plan goes as scheduled, then it will add value to the stability in the supply chain. Next, facilities. Due to the shortage of semiconductor chips in the market, it is because the manufacturing facilities are actually insufficient compared to the demand. So we need to have more investment injected in the manufacturing facilities. And such plan is being rolled out by different countries around the world because without having access to semiconductors, you will have disruption in the overall ecosystem that requires semiconductors. For example, if you don't have semiconductor chips for the auto industry, the whole industry could crumble as a result. So countries need to have the specific industries that would provide such materials, components
계획
in terms of
상당히 중요하게
semiconductor,
생각하고
and
계획을
this is a
발표해서 추진 중에
priority for the U.S.
있습니다.
government. Lots of plans have been rolled out in that
전 세계
regard.
반도체 제조 시설의 12.2%를
And
보유하고
they
있습니다.
have 12.2% of the manufacturing facilities for semiconductors, but they're quite old, outdated. So state-of-the-art facilities are not really present in the U.S.
최첨단 반도체
So
제조 시설을 구축하기 위해서
in order to establish state-of-the-art manufacturing facilities, TSMC of Taiwan and Korea, Korea semiconductor firms are receiving love calls from the U.S. And TSMC and Korean manufacturing firms have announced their plan to move into the U.S. to help them establish semiconductor facilities. And Intel, the largest company in the U.S., has also announced a similar plan. So I think it's going to be a big push and big initiative undertaken by the government for constructing manufacturing facilities. The same goes for Japan, as well as other countries. So manufacturing facilities are mostly concentrated in East Asia, but over the time, I think the share will go up relatively in the United States.
이미 이 반도체 제조 분야에 있어서는 한국과
So
미국이
in the
협력
semiconductor
중에
manufacturing area, there is already an ongoing cooperation between the U.S. and
정부에서도
Korea. The Korean
반도체
government,
육성을 위해서 반도체 산업 육성을
with a
위해서
view to promoting
올해 5월
semiconductor
달에
industry,
K 반도체
announced
전략이라는
the
것을
K
발표를
semiconductor
했습니다.
policy in May of this year.
이것은 이제 한국 반도체 산업 육성뿐만 아니고
This is not only to
전
promote the
세계
industry
반도체
development,
공급망
but
안정화를
for
위한
also
계획도 포함되어 있다고 보시면
stabilizing or
됩니다.
helping stabilize
그래서
the
앞으로
overall
10년 동안
semiconductor supply chain. So in the next 10 years, so that's $500 billion or more of investment will come from the private sector.
이를 지원하기 위해서
And to support that
부지
process,
확보,
site
또는 인프라
acquisition,
지원,
infrastructure support,
그리고 인력 양성,
and
그리고
manpower
기업 간
development,
협력,
and B2B
그리고
cooperation,
각종 규제에 대한 완화, 또
and
온실가스
relaxation
감축에 대한 지원,
regulations,
뭐 이런
and support and
내용들로
incentives
계획을
for the
발표를 해서
reduction of
앞으로
CO2 emissions.
계속 추진할 계획을
All of
갖고
these
있습니다.
plans have been announced as part of the semiconductor policy,
저희 반도체
and
산업에
implementation will
있어서
follow.
표준화 활동의 동향입니다.
So this is a trend of
사실
standardization
이제
in
이
semiconductor
표준화와
industry.
관련돼 있어서는
In relation
대한민국
to
반도체 산업
standardization,
자체가
the Korean
메모리 중심으로
semiconductor
되어
industry,
있기
because it
때문에
is very much centered by
의 활동들을
memory
그동안
semiconductor,
기업들 중심으로
a lot of
해왔고,
de facto standardization
시스템
activities have been undertaken by Korean
저희가
companies.
기술적으로
And in terms of
후발이기
system
때문에
semiconductor, we're
그런
rather a
표준화
latecomer to the
활동을
market.
활발히 하지
We have not been
못했습니다.
as active
그럼에도
in
불구하고
de facto
한국의
standardization activities.
국가 표준원의 지원을 받아서
But with the
활동을
support
지금
of
하고는
CATS,
있습니다.
we're
그
actively
줄의
promoting
표준에
standardization.
관해서는
As for de
지금
jure standards, ICTC 47 is a forum where Korean companies are engaged in. IC sensor, MEMS, emerging devices are the areas in which Korean experts are proposing standard items. And as for de facto standards, SEC, SK hynix, which are memory semiconductor companies,
그럼에도 불구하고
are
시스템
very much
반도체
actively
쪽에
engaged.
디펙터 활동은
But in terms of
우리가
de facto
AVY나
standardization,
비디오
for example, AV1,
이미 표준이 발표가 돼
AVY,
있고요.
video compression standards have already been published.
이 시스템 반도체 개발
The development of the system semiconductors that applies such standards has already been completed
표준이 시장이기 때문에 그러한
because standards
시장에
themselves
대응을 하기
represent a
위해서
market.
이미 나와 있는 표준을 우리가 제품으로 개발하는 활동을 하고
So
있습니다.
we're now
또
using
하나는
such standards in the
우리
development process of our
디펙터
products.
표준을 제한하기 위한 여러
Also
가지
to
활동을
propose
하고
de facto
있습니다.
standards,
IoT
we're engaged in
모바일
various
포럼을
activities.
주관해서
For example, by
주관해서
organizing IoT
디펙터에
mobile
대한
forum
표준을
to
우리가 향상시키는 활동들을 하고
increase the
있습니다.
quality of de facto
그리고 표준이
standards.
시장이기 때문에
Because
사실은
standards
이제
again
우리
represent
시스템 반도체
or
분야에서
equate
보면
to a
시스템
market.
반도체는
In the
작은
system
기업들입니다.
semiconductor
작은 기업들 입장에서 보면
market, there are
이
many
표준화
smaller
활동에
players.
대해서
And these players
저희가 중요하게 생각은
are not
안
very
해왔습니다.
motivated to be engaged in standardization, or they don't have the incentive to do so. But because standards are nonetheless very important, so we're trying to increase their awareness about promoting standardization, especially in terms of exploring the market frontiers, so that you can steer the development of the market in a way that would be beneficial to them. And in that regard, we're carrying out many education activities. That brings me to the end of my presentation, so thank you very much.
네, 너무나도 좋은 발표
Thank you for
감사합니다.
the
안기현
wonderful presentation. That
전무님께서
was
발표를
Ki-han
해주셨고요.
An from KSIA.
대한민국 하면은 반도체가
Well,
워낙에 강한
people would
국가로
we
알려져
equate
있어서
Korea as a powerhouse
저는
of
당연히
semiconductors.
한국의
And
그런
I
비중은
naturally
굉장히 높을
thought
거라고
that
생각을
Korea would have a very
했었는데
high
미국 또한
market share,
그렇게
but I
높은 비중을 차지하고
realized that the
있다니
United
양국이
States is
함께
a powerful
협력하면
country in that
더
regard. So
많은
if the
부분을
two
할 수 있지
countries can
않을까 생각이
cooperate
들었습니다.
together, then we can
네,
achieve so much more.
정말
So
많은
thank you.
발표를 오늘 청해
So
들었는데
we've
오늘
heard from so
마지막
many
발표 이제
presenters,
앞두고
and we're going to
있습니다.
have the last presentation of the day.
대표님께서
We have
차진의
with us
최영석
today the
대표님께서
CEO,
발표를 해주실 텐데요.
Young-seok Choi from
전기차
Charge
충전
In,
플랫폼
and
기술과
he will
표준화에
speak
대해서
about
발표를
Korean
해주실
EV charging
예정입니다. 네, 그럼
infrastructure
큰
and
박수로
its future
모시겠습니다.
direction. Please welcome him with a round of applause.
안녕하세요. 차진 최영석입니다.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Young-seok Choi. I am supposed to finish by
간략하고
11:45, and I realize that we are running behind our schedule, so let me try to speed up a little and focus on the key points.
뒤에 필요한 백엔드 플랫폼
We do not manufacture chargers ourselves. We provide a back-end system, and chargers cause conflicts between the EV users versus ICE users, and the users of chargers who have completed using the chargers, and the users who are waiting to charge their cars, and also between property owners and EV users. There's always room for conflict. Why? Because you need three key elements for charging infrastructure. First of all, you need to have space for putting your chargers, and you need
건물에 있는 전기.
electricity
그리고 세 번째는
inside a
공실 충전이
building to
불가능합니다.
charge your
그래서
vehicles.
항상
And thirdly,
시간은 똑같이
you
들어갑니다.
need
즉,
time,
이 세 가지 요소를
because the simultaneous use of chargers is impossible, and we need to
지금 전
find
세계적으로
solutions
특히 뭐
to
미국에서도
address all
전기차를
these
보급하는데
three
가장
types of
문제는 이제 충전
challenges.
인프라라고 생각을 합니다.
I believe that the biggest
대부분이 이제
challenge in
주유소에
terms of
익숙했기
deploying
때문에 빨리
EVs
충전하는
in
급속
any
충전기를
market
주유소처럼
is
많이
charging
설치하고 빨리 집어넣으면
infrastructure.
되지
For instance, a
않느냐라고
lot of
생각을
people might
하시는데
think that you can
실제
just
사용
deploy and
사항을
roll out
보면
chargers
조금
as
많이
quickly
다른
as
경우가
possible, but if you
발생합니다.
actually look at what's happening out in the field, things are rather different
우리나라에는
than
제주도가
what you
있습니다.
think. For instance,
제주도는
in
전
Jeju
세계에서
Island in
아주
Korea,
드문데 차량
where
전기차 보급률이 5%대
the
넘어가고 있고요. 섬은 큽니다만은
percentage
제주시의
share
전체
of
인구의
EVs in
70%가
the
몰렸기
overall
상당히
vehicle
많은
fleet in Jeju is about
작년 말
5%, which is quite high even
충전기
globally.
개수와 전기차 개수가 거의
And
비슷합니다.
as you can see here, the number of chargers and the number of
항상
EVs
전기차
is almost the
타시는
same as of last
분들은
year in
충전기는
Jeju Island.
가끔
But
고장이
from the
있고
perspective of
있는
users, they
충전기도
are
다른 차가
always running
충전하고
into
안
problems that some chargers
이런
do not
문제를
work,
어떻게 해결할
and
수 있을까요?
sometimes they cannot really take out the chargers from their cars. And then how can we
지금
address
많은
these
문제들 중에서
challenges?
충전, 급속 충전기 같은 경우에는
fast
땅에 돈
chargers,
내고 돈이 많이 들지만 설치하면 됩니다.
As a matter of
하지만
fact, you
사람들이
can
지금
just
대부분
put
도심
them
지역에 몰렸어요.
at a certain location under the ground, although it would cost money. But the problem is that people are increasingly living in urban areas, and we run into the same problems such as the lack of parking space and the limited power supply inside buildings. And at the same time,
그럼 건물에 전기를 증설한다는 것은 건물 전체를 다 뜯어서
to
고쳐야
address
되는
this
경우가
problem, for instance, if you're
신축
going
건물
to
같은
address the
경우에도 예를 들어서 뭐 아파트에
shortage of power
가정집이
inside a
5kW
building, you cannot really
전력을
rebuild
쓰는데 충전기
the
하나에
building
7kW를 해서
from
도대체
in the
얼마만큼의
first
전력
place.
공사할 것이며
And at the same time,
또
it's the
발전사가
same
여기에
for
필요한
home
전력을
environment
얼마나
as well.
준비할 것이냐.
How much
상당히
work is needed to
복잡한
improve the overall power
그래서
infrastructure
저희는 이제
of
차진에서
buildings or
EVG
your
solution
homes.
이라는 것을
To address this
만들었습니다.
problem, what we created
문제를 해결하기
is an EV charging solution.
저희가 좀 조사를 해봤는데요.
We
주택이
did some
많은
study
미국은 거의
ourselves in the
80%를
case of the
집에서
US.
충전하고요.
About 80%
유럽
of the
같은
EV
경우에는
owners
60%,
charge their
우리나라
cars
같은 경우에도 한
in their
60%
homes,
가까이
and the
집에서
comparable
밤에
figure in
충전합니다.
Europe is about 60%.
그럼 이게 가능한
And
이유가
mostly during nighttime,
매일 일반인들이 주행할 때 하루에 한
which means
120km 정도를 타지
that
않습니다.
the average daily
생각을
mileage
바꿔보면은 매일
is
탈 수 있을
not
만큼의
really
충전만 되면은
120
전기차
kilometers.
운행이 가능합니다.
And if
물론 이제
you
업무용으로
think
쓰는
about
차나
it,
택시, 뭐 트럭은
if you're just using your
이걸
cars for personal
전력량으로 생각을
purposes,
해보면은
you
하루에 한
don't
30kW.
really need
즉,
more than
콘센트
30
3kg 가지고 한
kilowatts
10시간
per
정도
day,
충전하면은
which would be
매일
enough
필요한
for your
충전을 할수
daily
있습니다.
driving, which
이렇게
would
될
be
경우 별도의
equal
설비를
to
설치하지
10
않고
hours of driving at 3
건물에 있는 콘센트나
kilowatts.
기존 전력들을 활용하는
This
기술을
means that you
개발하는 게 훨씬 더
can
현명하다고 생각을 하고 있습니다.
use a technology that would
이
make it
사례는
possible
저희가
for
이제
you to utilize the existing power supply in a more efficient manner.
오른쪽 그림처럼
As you
주차하면
can
한
see here
자리에만
on your
충전기가
right
설치돼
hand,
있고
for
전기차가
instance, if you
많아지다
go to a
보면
parking
계속
lot of a
충전 끝나면
building,
빼고
there's
돌려서
only
써야
one parking
이게
space
현실적으로
where
상당히
a
어렵죠.
charger is
그래서
installed.
저희가 생각한 게
And realistically
아파트에
speaking,
있는
it's very
건물의
inconvenient.
검침, 전력을
So what
검침해서
we
원격
thought of as a
검침기를
solution
통해서
is
실시간
to
사용 데이터
utilize
전력량을
smart
보고요. 거기에 맞춰서
meters
충전기를
and gather
다양하게
data regarding the
전력을
use of
지원합니다.
electricity so
즉,
that
여러
we
군데
can
세우더라도
provide a
충전을
constant
편하게 할 수
supply of power to the users.
그래서 저희가 개발한 게
And this is what we developed,
돈 받고
which
쓰는
is called a
콘센트를
smart
만들자.
outlet. This is an outlet
이게
that
이제
you can
번역이 되고
pay
있으니까 미국
for,
기준으로 말하면은 레벨 1 충전기.
and this is a level
3kW.
1 charger, less than 3 kilowatt.
저희가 이 제품이 전 세계에서 이런
So
컨셉이
this
없었습니다.
product
그래서
is
한국에서
really a
도시
novelty
샌드박스
in Korea.
임시허가를
So
처음으로
we
받았고,
received a
그리고
temporary
작년에 법규까지
permit from the
바뀌어서
Korean government through the
한국에서는
regulatory
이제 이 제품을
sandbox, and the
사용해서
regulation
전기차
was
충전
changed
사업을 할수
last
있게끔
year. So you
허가까지
can use this
받았습니다.
charger to
저희가
actually
처음에
get
KC
into this
인증받고
business.
기타
We
인증받을 때
received
상당히
KC
고생을
certification. We struggled a
올
lot
초에는 이제
initially,
미국
but beginning this year,
인증까지 받았습니다.
we received the
미국 인증
certification from the
진행할
US
때는
as
이게
well.
아울렛이기
So when we
때문에
carried out the
ETL만
process,
받으면
because it is an
됐었는데
outlet, we just had
많은
to
사람들이
receive
충전기로
ETL.
착각을 할 수 있어서
A lot of people
혹시나
actually
분쟁을
would
방지하기 위해서
confuse this as
충전기에 필요한 UL
a charger,
인증까지
not an
다
outlet.
받아봤습니다.
So we decided to just get full
그리고
certification for
시스템에서 이제
UL
코스트를 줄이기
for charging
위해서
as
여러
well.
가지
And also to reduce
기능들을 이제
cost,
포함을 시켰고
we added various features.
실제 유저 케이스를 보면 이렇게 말씀드릴
This
수
is a
있습니다.
user case.
차 한 대가 들어왔을
So you
때는
have one
7kg
car,
쓰고요.
7 kilowatt will
건물에
be
전력이
used
더 없기 때문에
because you don't have more
충전기
power
각각
here in the
3개다에서
building.
21kg 넣으면
So,
좋겠습니다만은
if
그렇게
you can
못하는
put like
경우가
21 kilowatt with 3
두 번째 차가
chargers,
들어오면
it
이제
would be
반반
nice,
나눠서
but we can't do that.
세
So
번째
if we
차가
have two,
들어오면
then
첫
we can
번째
divide
차가
it between the
빠질
two.
때까지 그냥 기다리는
The third car comes
이런
in, then you
식으로
would have
이제
to
전력을
wait until the
분배해서
two cars actually leave.
스마트
So we
차징.
would distribute our power
실제
across
설치된 사례고요. 왼쪽이
vehicles
이제
over
저희
here.
아울렛,
So this is the
오른쪽이
actual case
이제
of charging.
레벨
The
2에
outlet over
해당되는
here,
AC
this is
차저.
level 2 AC charger.
그래서 건물 내에 이
So
이제
in the building,
아울렛과 AC
you have an
차저를
outlet
복합적으로 설치해서
and an AC
사용자의
charger
편의성에
installed at the
따라서
same
활용할 수
time,
있게끔
which would be used at the convenience of the users.
이건 이제 저희 혼자 한 게 아니고요. 원격
I didn't do
검침을
this
하는 전문
myself,
회사와
but we worked
연계시킨
together with the
콜라보레이션으로
remote
탄생한
meter
기술입니다.
reading companies
미국
through
같은
collaboration and
경우에도
partnership,
지금
and in the
완속
US as
충전에
well,
대해서는
for slow
캘리포니아 같은
charging,
경우에
California, the state of
캘리포니아
California, they have an energy
리베이트를 주는
commission,
사업을 하고 있고 저희가
provide
작년에 어플라이를 했는데
rebate-based
아쉽게도 떨어졌습니다.
programs we applied, but
미국만
we
하더라도
didn't
레벨 2
land
7kg
the
차저나
incentive.
레벨 3 DC
Level
차저에
2,
대해서는
7%
리베이트가
charger,
있는데
and level
이런 건
3
처음 봤다.
chargers.
라고 해서
They
저희
have
이제
the
안타깝게
rebate
못 받고 있는
programs,
그런
but they
상황이고요.
said this is the first time that they saw
저희
this, so we
시스템은
were not
이제
able to get the
원격
rebates.
검침뿐만이 아니고 빌딩
So
같은
this is not only for the
경우에는
remote
전력 효율화
meeting,
시스템이
but
있습니다.
also for the building. There is a
빌딩의
building
전력 효율화
efficiency
시스템과 저희 플랫폼을
power management
연동시켜서
system, and
요거
our
같은
platform
경우에는
can be
이제
linked to that,
한국전력
to the building
캡코하고 해서
system.
베트남
With
실증
this,
사업을
we had a
작년에 다
partnership with
완료를
KEPCO.
했는데
We
이
finished our
코로나 때문에
demonstration
저희가
project in
가서
Vietnam,
준공을 지금 못
but
하고
we were
있는
not able to go
그런
there
상황이고요.
to complete our construction due to COVID-19 restrictions.
그다음 중요한 게
Next
기계 설치
important thing is that we put in place our systems, machines, everything, but we need to define the owner of the outlets because there may be single owner of the property or multiple, there may be apartment, different types of houses with various interests at stake. We need to have a contract process which would be very complicated. So whoever claims to be an owner would set the
사용하고
price, and a
여기서
user
분쟁을 알아서
will use
해결하게끔
the
만드는
outlet,
플랫폼 형태로
and we need to have a
시스템을
platform
만들었습니다.
that would
즉,
mediate the
P2P
process. It's a P2P process.
이 플랫폼을 만들고 났더니 이제
After we put in
제휴해야 될
place
분들이
the
많아지더라고요.
platform, we had to
해외
work with
같은 경우에는
various
이제
collaborators.
PayPal
For example,
계좌도
PayPal
주차장하고 같이
system would have to
받았으면
come in,
좋겠다는 이제
and
요구도
also
있고.
the
그래서 이
parking
다양한
lot
요구를 맞출
owners
수 있게끔 저희
would need
플랫폼은
to come into the scene as well.
연동시켜서
With
모든
the
사업자하고
various
붙일 수
needs, we are
그렇게
putting in
준비를
place an
하고 있고,
APR to
내년
connect to
초에는 이제
different
미국 시장 들어가기 위해서는
users.
저희
We're also
파트너하고
trying to get into the US
계약을
market.
진행하고 있는
We have a local partner that we're working with to sign a
궁극적으로는
contract.
모든 충전 회사가 그렇습니다.
So
미국 같은
ultimately, all the
경우에도
charging companies, the same goes for the
그
US
회사가
companies
모든
too.
땅을 계약하고 충전기를 직접 설치하고 운영하는
They, for
직영의 형태로 보고
example,
있습니다.
they are
마치
trying to have a
힐튼
direct operated system like a Hilton
저희가 생각하는 거는 그게
franchisee,
아니고
franchise
에어비앤비처럼
system. But
누구나
we're trying to do it
충전
like an
사업자가 되는 건물주들이
Airbnb.
충전기 설치하고
Everybody
쓰는
can
사람들이
become the
쓰고
users.
저희를 통해서 이제
We're
수수료를
just
받을 수 있는
we're just
이런
charging for
마켓플레이스
our
플랫폼을
marketplace
지향하고 있습니다.
platform for the service charge.
저희는 다양한
That is a vision.
어플리케이션을 준비하고 있습니다.
We have different applications in
들어가는 거.
preparation for the
그리고
street
동남아
lights
같은 경우 이제
and also for the Southeast
전기
Asian
이륜차를
countries.
개조한 차들이 더 많습니다.
They have bicycles
그리고 이제 이스쿠터 같은 경우
that have been converted, and also e-scooters. They
전
use
세계에서
constant, the
콘센트
outlets.
중에 빌링을
But
할 수 있는
other
시스템은
outlets,
현재까지는 저희가
they don't have the charging-based outlets. But we're the first to have
e-scooter는
produced
불도 많이
that
납니다.
product. The
왜냐하면
e-scooters
저렴한
have
시스템이기
lots of
때문에
fire
충전이
accidents because it's
끝나야
cheap.
되는데 계속 충전이
The charging would have to be
그래서 이제
completed,
저희
but it
아울렛은
doesn't finish.
처음에 지정된
So our
시간만큼
system,
전기가
only
들어가고
for a
그
defined
이후에는
period of
차단이
time, would supply power, and it would discontinue the supply
저희
of power
회사는 만든 지
afterwards.
얼마 안 된 스타트업입니다.
We're
제가
a very
말씀드리고
short
싶은 거는 지금 미국도
startup with a short
전기차
history,
보급
but
때문에
in the
충전 인프라에
U.S.
대한
For
노력들을
the
많이 하고 있는
EV
걸로
charging infrastructure
우리나라는
development, there are a lot of efforts
2015년부터
underway.
그걸 했습니다.
We have been doing that since
리베이트를 줘서
2015
충전기를 설치하기도
by
하죠.
providing rebates to put in
제가
place
그때부터
the
말씀드린
charging
게 이
infrastructure.
아울렛이었는데
This
국내
was an
법규 때문에
outlet that we
못해서
talked about, but we
임시허가를
couldn't do
받고
that because of the
법도
regulations, so
바꾸고
we
이제 상용화가 되고 있습니다.
received a temporary permit from the
미국도
government and
마찬가지로
led to
레벨
the
2나 레벨
change of the
3의
regulation.
충전기
The
외에
other than the level
다양한
2 and 3
한국에서
charges in the
있었던
US
사례들을 좀 참조하셔서
could probably learn from
이런
the
부분들도 이제
Korean
미국에
reference
적용하고
cases,
저희 제품이 들어갔을
which
경우에
could,
미국에서 리베이트도 받을 수
for
있는
example, use as a
이런 형태의
guideline for the
제안들을 좀
development of your
드려보고자
chargers in the
오늘
US. So
발표를
we wanted to propose these ideas for the further collaboration. So thank you very much.
네, 최영석 대표님 좋은
Thank you
발표
very much,
감사드립니다.
Mr.
정말
Choi,
기술
for
강국
such an
대한민국이라는
informative
부분을 또
presentation,
실감할 수 있었던 것
which
같습니다.
proved to us once
오늘
again that
저희가
we are
제1차
an
한미 표준
actual
포럼을
technology
통해서
leader.
다양한 분야를 함께
Today we
다뤄봤었는데요.
discussed a number of
양자
topics
기술,
in a number of
그리고
different
그
fields,
나아가서도
including quantum
자율차
technology
중에서도
and
배터리부터
autonomous
안전성
driving
그리고
with a
충전
focus on
인프라까지
battery
볼 수
safety and
있었는데다가
charging
인공지능 그리고
infrastructure,
반도체까지
AI
다양하게
and
주제를 한번
semiconductors were
다뤄봤습니다.
all the
다시
topics that we
한번
discussed
참석해주신
today.
모든
Once
분들
again, I would like to
감사드리면서
thank
한미 양국이
everyone
또
for
글로벌
coming.
기술과
And
표준의
at the same
정말
time, when
강국으로서
it comes to
함께 더 나아갈 수
standardization
있는 그런
in
계기가 되었으면
technology
좋겠습니다.
sectors, I
네,
hope that
지금까지
Korea and
참여해주신
the
모든
US will
분들 다시
strengthen
한번
their
감사드리면서 한미
partnership
표준
so that they
포럼
can
제1차
solidify their
마치도록
status as
하겠습니다.
leaders in this field.
본행사의 영상을
With that,
혹시
that
추가로 또
we
보실
are
분들이
at the
계시다면
end of
유튜브
our
채널을 통해서 다시
session
한번 보실
today,
수 있도록
and
저희가
I am
올려두도록
letting you know
하겠습니다.
that you can
많은
watch us
관심
again on YouTube
부탁드리겠습니다.
anytime.
함께해 주신
I
여러분
ask for your
대단히
continued
감사합니다.
interest.
지금까지 사회
Thank you very much.
조주연이었습니다.
My name is
고맙습니다.
Jo Ju-yeon, and I have been your MC today. Thank you.